Guys by the Rumbles?
Yeah.
All right.
Sorry, John. It was a good topic. We should talk that sometime. Anyway, it's the top of the hour. We have 25 people with us, and if we go to any more, then I've got to scroll back and forth to see faces.
Me too. That's tough.
I like it when we have this. Anyway, welcome everyone to our weekly gathering from around the world on Zoom. Once again, an interesting thing. Oh, while I'm thinking about it, and maybe I'll mention it later also, the next 2 Saturdays I will be on vacation, and I think were you going to do something, Dan, or we just?
Yeah, I think there seems to be a lot of energy and for small breakout sessions with the kind of the mental games about square dancing. So
Okay.
I was going to host that, which will probably have a smaller turnout, but yeah, people want that.
Okay.
I enjoy that quite a bit. So
I'll play.
Cool. We'll pull that in.
So I guess I should introduce our topic and topic presenter today. We thought we'd go in a different direction. You're not going to learn anything useful to be a caller here. Maybe you will.
Yeah, you will.
But it should be interesting, as all of our things have been, and almost more interesting is some of the conversations afterwards. But I would like to introduce the main speaker. And one of the things I'm really known for is introductions, how poorly I do them. But this gentleman has presented for us before. He is a square dance caller, calls party nights through C4, or should I say C4 through party nights. He started at the top and has worked his way down and is very in on the traditional contra scene also. He's a member of Caller Lab, still on the board of governors, Clark? I keep forgetting. Nope. No, not on the board of governors, was on the executive committee. Our last talk of Clark's was on the definitions and the theories and such behind them. He's head of the definitions committee.
Not anymore.
Not anymore. Yeah, you left that too. Wow. And Clark is going to talk about computer programs. He's been into computers longer than he's been into square dancing. And the history of computer programs and for writing square dance choreography is something Clark not only has researched, but has lived through and has been part of it. And the main introduction I like to give about Clark, I don't know if I said Clark Baker yet. I do that at the end.
It is Clark Baker, yes. Otherwise, Scott, I wouldn't be here.
Scott, we don't need to comment about everything. You keep taking the yellow circle away from people. The main thing I like to say about Clark that most of you don't care about is he and I are good friends, and he's been a good friend for many, many years. And without further ado, let's let Clark Baker take it over. Clark Baker from Belmont, Massachusetts. Go for it, Clark.
So I started dancing maybe my second time when I was at MIT in '74 with Dennis Marsh doing the teaching. And I'd always wanted to computerize stuff as soon as I learned computers. I learned computers in about 1970. And I often would go, oh, here's an interesting game. Let's see if I can computerize it. Here's something I need to do for schoolwork. Let's see if I can write a computer program.
That's my function of whether I want that.
So would it be possible to share my screen?
That should be turned on for you.
Okay.
So you should be able to share a screen using the button in the bottom middle of your Zoom.
Participants chat, share screen. Here we go. Oh, interesting. I think It gives
Even
me,
I learned how
I'm
to
going
do
to be
that.
risky and share my, well,
Share your whole screen.
I normally do that. I think you might get a better view.
That is
Sorry.
risky.
Mail, Emacs, text edit, text edit. It doesn't seem to, pages. There we go. Let's just start by sharing pages and see if that works. Okay.
Ta-da!
Oh, wow.
Success. I tried to make the font big in case it helps.
I'm able to
So,
read it. But
I
Um,
can't, but that's all right.
Yeah. Um, so there's a great talk at MIT each year, and there is a video of it that you can find on YouTube, which is the How to Give a Talk by Patrick Winston. And I've attended that several times, but I've never tried to like implement his principles in giving a good talk. But one of the things I remember from his talk is you should make a promise at the beginning and then show at the end of the talk that you delivered on that promise. So my promise for you is by the end of this talk, you'll know what these programs are good for and what their limitations are. And the first thing we need to talk about is before computers, what did callers do with respect to managing their choreography and creating choreography? And they did stuff with sketching out where the dancers are with paper and pencil, and they used checkers. And I saw some of you talking about your checkers, and I have a set and mine are thick and I can pick them up and move them around, you know, so I can move a whole ocean wave. I can do a giant pass through just by picking up the line and jumping it over. And perhaps people use teacups and maybe even invented teacup chain. So why did people need to do any of this? And I think basically you wanted to write modules or whole sequences or singing call figures, or maybe a clever resolution. Like if you're good at site calling to a certain place and then you have a clever at home get out or surprise ending, you kind of work that backwards with your checkers to see how to do that. Perhaps you want to write or check or even understand material, be they individual calls, because lots of new calls were invented in the 70s, or sequences that you found in callers note services. And there aren't as many caller note services today, but there still are some. And maybe you see something and want to go, how does that really work? Especially for me, writing challenge material that I'm going to later read from the mic, where most of this challenge material is used exactly once. You need a lot of material that's called at a given dance, and that had to all be written out beforehand. So in general, it depends on how you generate your choreography that you use at your dance. Are you a site caller? Do you use modules, memorize sequences? Are you reading your material? How about mental image? Or maybe some combination of the above. Do callers and dancers learn anything by pushing checkers through an individual call or through a sequence of calls? Do you learn proper use of hands and body flow? I don't really know. All I use checkers for is getting from the beginning to the end of a sequence and making sure it works.
Right.
But others talk about these other things. And if the physical tactile nature of moving checkers and looking and seeing is really doing something for you, then we may be losing that with computer choreography programs. And we'll talk about that later. The first program I'm aware of is a program I wrote as part of my undergraduate thesis at MIT starting in 1975. I graduated in 76, so I probably worked on it for, 6 months or so. As I said earlier, I was first exposed to computers in 1970 and used to program everything I could. I met two dancers at MIT, Mike Tursoff and John Detreville. We talked choreography and stuff. And one of them I think, had already thought about how to do a computer program. They were ahead of me in school and ahead of me in square dancing, and they'd already thought about the problem. And they said it was impossible. And one of the examples they gave is, let's consider ocean waves. And I'm sorry, I'm not good enough in using Taminations to show you a picture here, but how far apart are the ocean waves? Well, if they're spaced, not tight packed, but just a little bit of extra space, then all the dancers can do a hinge, and the pivot point of the hinge doesn't change, and we have new ocean waves going in the east-west direction. Does that make sense? So
Yep.
that's a good spacing. And maybe that's how far apart ocean waves are supposed to be spaced. But yet, when we have other formations where you do, for example, the centers in and cast off 3/4, that cast off everyone thought was a gating action where the cast off went around one dancer, and that spacing would have the lines be different spacing apart than the ocean waves, etc. Now, back then, we never used the term breathing, and we didn't really talk about that. But we know there's a lot of square breathing that goes on. And anyone who's written a program that shows animations has to deal with all the square breathing issues. But I think initially John Detreville and or Mike Tursoff thought this stuff was kind of impossible because we'd never worked out how that works and what you need to do. So
I can vouch that these are difficult problems that I've had to deal with.
yes, and that's Brad with Taminations, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So in any event, I don't like it when someone tells me I can't do something. So I kind of went off and wanted to figure out how to do it. And as I said, I'd learned to dance in '74, and I'm not a caller. So for all the people who are newer callers on this Zoom call, you know, almost think back to before you were a caller and you were wondering, how does the caller do all that? Well, I was wondering the same thing. John Sobalski, I learned Plus in '74, and John Sobalski taught an advanced class in spring of '75. And I kept climbing up the levels after that. And I had one goal in mind that was a little unusual for my program, which was if it was legal to do a call from a certain position, I wanted my program to be able to do it. And what I wanted to do as a dancer is write a computer program that could create square dance choreography. Same thing as the caller on the stage does. So it had to know I wanted it to be smooth, flowing, resolved, proper square dance choreography at what today would be called the plus level, or maybe advanced. And I also wanted it to be able to do anything that was legal, because I was kind of getting into definitions at the time, and you know, what you hear people talk about standard positions and all that, and I wasn't so interested in that. That was partly the way we were brought up at the square dancing at MIT. So here we're talking about a program that's kind of unlike all the other programs we're going to talk about today. Its goal is to generate choreography, not push checkers. So let's talk about that for a little bit. It's certainly something I know more about and have thought about. So the first thing is proper use of hands. I'm a dancer. I had heard the saying that you can't use the same hand twice in a row. That's what all the callers said. But what does that really mean? None of them, they kind of knew how to apply it in their calling mostly, but they didn't really know what it means from an algorithmic point of view. And then we come to the call scoot back, which, so I've heard when it was first created, callers said it would never work because it used the same hand, usually your right hand, 3 times in a row. You're hanging on in ocean waves with the right hand, you go into the middle, you work with someone with the right hand, and you come back out and you're hooked on with the right hand. And yet we know scoot back's a great call. And what I realized is it's not that you can't use the same hand twice, It's that you can't use a hand at the beginning of the call that needs to be available, like square through needs to have your right hand available at the beginning of the call, when it's unavailable from the end of the previous call. And unavailable might mean you've just done a pull by. So if you've just done a pull by with your right hand, it's kind of behind your back and you can't do a right pull by, right pull by, right pull by. But that's kind of what hand availability is about. If it's kind of at your side or in an ocean wave, maybe it's available. So the first thing I had to do is teach the computer for every call what hands are unavailable at the end of the call and what hands need to be available at the beginning of the call. Next, flow. Everyone has an opinion on what flows and feels good, and no one's really articulated it in a way that is suitable for, algorithmically for a computer program. And my first approach was a pretty gross approach, which basically said at the beginning of every call, I'm going to need to do this for the beginning and end of every call, but we need to know, are you standing still, dodging left, dodging right, walking forward, walking backwards, turning to the right in place, turning to the left in place, walking in a tight arc to the right, in a tight arc to the left, or walking in a bigger arc to the right and a bigger arc to the left. And I basically did that for every person's part at the beginning and end of every call. And then I had a little matrix that said, if the ending dance action, flowing action for this dancer was one of those 12 things I just enumerated, and the beginning dance action was, again, one of the 12 actions I just enumerated, how good or bad does it feel? And I simply had, it feels fine, it feels a little bad, or it feels awful. And I would not do any calls where it felt awful or call combinations. And I would allow, I think it was a pair of dancers because of symmetry, to have one doesn't feel great. So that's flow. And I don't think that flow is perfect by today's standards, but it's pretty good. And an interesting thing is I believe none of the future programs I'm going to talk about consider the proper use of hands or flow. So these ideas never made it into all the choreographic writing programs. Now we come to resolving. Here I am, a dancer who doesn't know how to resolve. I know how to solve Rubik's Cube, but I don't know how to resolve a square. So I went out and interviewed. Oh, and I think I had my thesis done, and my advisor said, this is good stuff. I think your program should resolve. I'm like, oh. So I went out. I know he came back to me with something. I don't remember exactly what. I think it was the resolving thing. So I went out and interviewed 3 callers. Dennis Marsh, our club caller, Don Beck, who I'd met, and Bob Gamble, who did some, in our area, was another good caller and did some advanced calling. I might have gone to one of his workshops. And interestingly, none of those people could explain how they resolved the square. Don said he had this book he was writing about this mental image system, and he tried to tell me a bit about it, but it wasn't what I needed or wanted. Dennis, a longtime caller, very good. You never saw his resolves coming. He just seemed to be able to do it, rarely got his corners mixed up. He couldn't really explain what he did. I think in retrospect, he probably used a variety of mechanisms. And Bob Gamble did the best, but still it was nothing I could implement as an algorithm. So I had to invent something on my own, which was basically first get him into a good formation, like ocean waves or lines or something. Second, normalize the genders. So it was boy, girl, girl, or girl, boy, boy, girl. One of the 2 of our 6 arrangements, as we now know they're called. And third, I pre-wrote out some get outs that once you were in those, it would kind of walk its way down to a resolve. And that worked, and it could write sequences, and you'd see me with computer printout, perforated papers, and I'd stand there and read sequences to any square I could get up who would walk through and see what I thought. I will say that I had a problem that doing a call that's legal from anywhere, like head boys quarter right was legal from anywhere. But once you did it, you didn't have many calls you could do next. Side girls quarter left, head girls quarter right. And it kind of would get lost in the weeds and all these weird things. So for every formation, as I remember, I had to have a probability, and these were powers of 2. Like you'd almost never want to get in ocean waves plus head boys quarter right. And it would pick where it went next based on the probability of wanting to be there. But it still it knew sex dependent calls, like it could do slide throughs and all that, but it didn't know the idea of standard position, or that hadn't been invented yet, and I didn't know it. So Don will remember this day. He got me invited to go talk at our local Callers Association, Tri-State Callers Association. I think that would be Maine, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts are the tri-states. And I had never really talked or called to callers much before. And we got a square of them up. And as many of you know, as the joke goes, callers can't dance. And not only can callers not dance, but we could barely get through the first sequence as I read this because it didn't use standard positioning. And I did try to do every call from every place, the program, teach the program how to do everything from everywhere. So it was an eye opener. And Jim Mayo, I think, still talks about that. So I guess I want to get off that program. If you care, it was written in Algol 60. It ran on a PDP 11. It ran a operating system that we wrote at MIT called Delphi that was used for teaching.
Yep.
And it was the only program like it. It was good at flow. It was good at hands. It was good at dancing by definition. It did not do animations. It did not know how many beats. It didn't have any understanding of degree of difficulty. And it also didn't do any calling with a purpose, which I don't have this at the end of my talk, but we might come back to this because I think it's an important point. And that's the end of that. Okay. A year later, John Sobalski, who was actually a year earlier than me in college, but he kind of got waylaid in his career. He did an MIT undergraduate thesis, and he called his a computer square dancer. And it was written in Muddle and ran on a PDP-10 running the incompatible time-sharing system, as composed to CTSS, the compatible time-sharing system, because those guys in the AI lab were renegades. And anyhow, that's what it did. I don't remember much about it. I had a copy of his thesis. Rob French had a copy of his thesis, and we both have lost over the years our copies. And I don't know if anyone has a copy of his thesis. I think his goal was to make a dancer that was really smart and knew how to reach out and find the dancers beside them and interact with each other. While my thesis was kind of a parlor trick, he wanted real smarts in his. I don't think he got super far. This is a really hard problem, but that's all I know about John's thesis. And obviously John passed away a while ago, so we can't ask him. I asked Rob French, he didn't have a good memory. He kind of mistook John's effort for my effort. Okay, moving on.
If anybody can ever find a copy of that, they've now got Muddle running again. So I don't know, we should maybe look at the thesis archives at MIT and see if they happen to include the source code in an appendix.
Right. My source code was in my thesis, but none of the undergraduate theses were ever archived anywhere. So in 1983, I was calling all levels of challenge, and I had to write a substantial amount of material. This was all done by pushing manual checkers. And in the old days, I would sometimes have my wife double check the material before I called it. The better callers would just call their material without checking it. And if it seemed to stop working, they'd site call their way out of it, and hopefully the dancers wouldn't notice. But I wasn't that good at site calling.
I'm not sure that's correct, Clark. My wife still checks my material.
Yeah. The sloppier callers. Yeah. So we were going to have a baby that was due in January 1983. And she pointed out that I wouldn't have enough time to write all the material anymore, and she wouldn't have time to check it. And I needed to write a program to help me. And there's a lot I could say about how this program evolved. And I only mention this because I'll later come to Vic Cedar, and his program also evolved as, you know, I did this, I did that, and then I added this, and then this set of handouts I did for my groups gave me a database of before and after pictures, and I slowly went into this program. But at the time I was working for Symbolics, and we made a system that cost $120,000, and it was a single user workstation that ran the Lisp programming language and was used by artificial intelligence researchers to solve hard problems. And I borrowed time on the computers I had access to at work and wrote a checker pushing program, which I never gave a name to. It was kind of the Lisp machine program. And it was brute force, but it was able to do concepts and fractions somewhat, and phantoms and resolve. And an important thing you'll hear me keep harping on is it gave users menus of what was legal from where it was. It really knew what it could and couldn't do. And a lot of these later programs I'm going to talk about, like, they used abbreviations and you never kind of knew what it could or couldn't do. And you'd try this and try that, and you never knew how to talk to it well. So the programs that could articulate or come up with menus of, I can do the following things from here, were much more usable and friendly than the ones that you just had to kind of keep trying at. It did not do animations. I didn't understand why anyone would want animations. That wasn't what I needed as a challenge caller. It didn't understand beats, flow, proper use of hands, which is interesting given that I'd done this other thesis that knew all that. I didn't care about that for me as a new caller writing, or an experienced caller writing challenge choreography. The callers who are experienced, they know hands and flow and all that. They just want to push the checkers quickly. And I used that for, I don't know, I'm guessing the next 20 years, and wrote all my material on it. And John Sobalski, I was happy to give away the source code. John Sobalski got it up and running on some of the Lisp machines he had access to. Okay. Let's stop here for a second. So far, I haven't really talked about much other than me and John. And let's look at personal computers. So everything I've talked about to date was written on a big computer that only a university or a business could afford. And
Right.
no one's going to have them in their house. And when the ability to manufacture a computer on a chip happened, it launched the hobby computer field, and that was in 1974. That's the good news, but no one did anything with square dancing computers. They were toys. And in fact, I, as a user of big computers at universities and work, would turn my nose up at these toy computers. In 1977, the Apple II came out, and some of you may have owned an Apple II. It cost, in today's dollars, $5,000. Like, you would buy a house, you would buy a car, and then you would buy a computer for your house. Those were the range of prices of things. And it had no memory, no disk, and you stored your programs on an audio cassette. It had a black and white monitor. It had black and white output that you would plug into your television that gave you 24 lines and 40 characters wide. It was pretty bad. Nothing happened with square dancing and computers then. In 1981, IBM announced the IBM PC. It cost, in those dollars, $1,500, so more than $5,000. And in 1983, IBM sold more than, almost 1 million of them. So this was and businesses bought them and home users bought them. And then in 84, they did a faster one. And also in 83, they did a better one with an internal disk. 84, they did a faster one. And also in 84, the very first Macintosh came out. It cost $6,000 in today's money, and it had more memory than back here, but still not a lot. And it had this floppy disk. And now we're kind of getting somewhere. Somewhere in '84, I ran a session at Color Lab called Computers and Square Dancing. They didn't really know who I was at Color Lab. Don had invited me to go. I was a newer caller. I didn't click with any of the other callers because I didn't call mainstream and plus, and I didn't do singing calls. So I was one of these freaky people in the challenge area. And I only associated with people, well, Don Beck would show me around and that was nice. But Bill Davis was a good guy who I kind of clicked with. He had gone to Caltech and he was into formations and definitions a little bit. And later I might have met Kip Garvey. So a guy named Avron or Ron Ehrlich created a choreography program, which later was given this name PILLM. And he offered it to free. He asked for a donation to a charity. And it ran on DOS. DOS was the operating system before Windows, kind of command line oriented. And it did mainstream through A2. And later he added challenge calls. And it used this weird set of abbreviations, which was pretty off-putting. And you could teach it new calls. That's another feature you're going to want to know about. Can you teach this program new calls, or are you stuck with whatever the programmer put in there? And it also ran an incredibly small amount of memory. So it probably could run on some of these older IBM PCs. Okay. In 1988, Paul Galbert, who was a C4 dancer on Long Island and a big PC user, convinced me that we could use database software that ran on PCs like DBase 2 or something, and maybe make it do square dancing. So I used my list machine, pre-generated this big expanded database and dumped it to DBase 2. And we wrote a program called Choreographer that we sold in 3 versions, A2, C2, and C4, between $95 and $495. And it could give you menus of what was legal from where you are. It could do some concepts and fractions. It couldn't do the phantoms that you really needed at C3 and C4. And it could do plus, but I don't think the plus callers who bought it really got a lot out of it. I don't know. I know some people bought it. We maybe sold, 50 to 100 versions of it. I don't know. So that's Choreographer. In 1988, a guy named Bill Fote, I think from California, and wrote a program called Caller's Angels. And he's sometimes credited with his wife, Kathy Vila. And she was, I think, doing documentation. So it had great documentation. It ran on DOS, cost $129, and did through advanced. And it was really the first program oriented toward mainstream and plus callers. It may have had voice input, and it also handled asymmetric choreography. I bet some of you may have had that program. That was the main one out there, especially if you were a plus caller. And he did a good job on it. I mean, it was professionally done. In 1989, Don Beck offered Desktop Dancer for the Mac for $129. And he developed it using HyperCard, which was newly available on the Mac. And I don't think of Don as, a whiz-bang computer programmer, but he was a mere mortal. And yet he could develop something that had great graphics, user interfaces, and teach a computer to dance. He kind of saw his way through and just plugged away. And initially it knew up through plus. It offered menus of what was legal from where you are, could do speech output. And he did know the beats of each call, and it could generate random sequences. So that's the second one that could generate sequences. And it had various modes where you could practice mental image and sight calling. It could hide dancers and the dancer labeling, etc. And he did a second version that never got out there that did more calls and maybe was a bit better. We'll probably talk about it some more since Don's on the call. In 1990, I worked with Dave Wilson and created AutoChecker. This consumed a different version of my list machine database. and it did everything choreographer could do, but it could do phantoms. But if it could do phantoms, it took away the ability to create menus of what was legal from where you are. It was expensive, and there were probably no more than 20 users. But I think people really did use it to write, real choreography. And everything I've mentioned is probably no longer available, no longer under development, no longer in use. And we're talking 30 to 45-year-old software. And Don's hasn't been in active development for some number of years, but I think he can run it today on a descendant of HyperCard. So now we come to SD, credited to Bill Ackerman and Stephen Gilday. I think of Bill as being the main person you hear about today. He still develops it, maintains it, does bug fixes. Stephen Gilday is still out in California and is a computer programmer. I also, because it was offered for free under the GNU public license, I know that Sue Curtis also had an offshoot that she added and tweaked the direction it worked in. I don't know if that's still around or what she uses, but SD, unassuming name, really simple. And its sweet spot was to allow challenge callers to write their choreography. He didn't like my expanding the database approach. He wanted a program that was smart enough to do the concepts and nested concepts, and just to be humorous, nested concepts from, quote, first principles. It should know if calls have parts, how to roll, how to sweep, etc. It's written in C and distributed under GNU's GPL. GNU's not Unix. GPL is a general
Right.
public license, and it's a way of distributing software. And I quoted these two paragraphs from the GNU public license. And this is an awesome thing that a guy, why am I spacing on his name?
Richard Stallman.
Richard Stallman, right. Richard Stallman, who actually learned to square dance. He went to lessons that John Sobalski ran.
Yep.
I think my wife kicked him out of the lessons because he couldn't show up regularly and was kind of a pain. Anyhow, Richard Stallman has done great stuff in making software available, including the source code. So anybody who's a programmer can get it and look at how it works and change it and use it for their own purposes. And that's what that's what SD and other programs were offered under. And I wrote, Bill continues to add features, fix bugs. My belief is more challenge sequences have been written on SD and called than any other program. It's of highest quality, and for better or worse, has been used as an arbiter for, is this legal? Let's see what SD does. And we're going to probably talk about that feature a little bit later. And Bill's on the call, so we can ask him stuff.
Yeah, so be careful.
Yeah. Be careful what you say. Lorenz Cooley in Germany in 92. So I forget the date. Let's go back. So we're up to 92 also for Bill. Lorenz Cooley in Germany introduced WinHash. It ran on Windows, was offered for $200, designed for mainstream through A2, very popular. It's the first program that I'm aware of that shows animations of the calls and could show users what calls it could do. It could show the users what calls it can do from where it is. It couldn't resolve. I don't believe it's no longer available, but it was very popular. This is the program that all the users purchased if you were a mainstream or plus caller and had spent the big bucks on a PC. By 96, there's a bunch more programs. I was not very aware of these. They came and went. You can just read what I wrote on the page. They all did animation. Clearly, animation for mainstream and plus callers and dancers was a huge deal. And everyone started coming out with these. Marty's a caller I think on the West Coast. And I definitely remember the name Ralph Houseman for a while. But I'm just going to move on. Vic Cedar, 97, introduced CSDS, the Cedar Square Dance System. Vic's an outstanding and very creative C4 caller. but also calls a variety of the dance programs. He basically wanted to write a program in Visual Basic that does everything a C4 caller like himself would want. He wanted to push checkers, resolve, save the sequences, give him big databases of old sequences, remember where he called these sequences, be able to say, show me all the sequences that use a certain call or a certain idea. It should store his music, play his music. It should have all the singing call lyrics, etc. This is, he basically would just keep adding and adding to this, and it's an outstanding system. I certainly purchased a copy of it. It does not do animations. It doesn't know beats. It did resolve. It does concepts, fractions, knows what's legal, what could be and could be taught correctly. Oh, and you can, here's a feature. You can teach it new stuff. Now, if you teach it wrong, all your sequences written with that new wrong idea are going to be wrong. So that's a dangerous idea, but correctly or incorrectly, you can teach it something new. It gives you menus of what's legal from where you are. It can handle asymmetric choreography. It can do hexagons. It's actively maintained, runs on Windows, costs $200. Brad Christie, also on the call, in about 2001, according to my records, started offering Taminations, which is available as a web page. So that was a new thing. And it showed the animations and the definitions of individual calls, and it did each call from a variety of places. And it didn't do sequences initially, it just did the calls. And this was a great teaching tool for dancers and callers. And also, being on the web, it was offered for free and basically always available. And over the years, Brad has expanded the calls and that it knows. So it's kind of great at mainstream through C1 and knows a bunch of C2 and C3. And in 2010, he added a sequencer, which allows it to do sequences of calls. I think it doesn't resolve and only does certain concepts, phantoms, but he has a lot of the fractions in there. And it uses abbreviations, and you can teach it your favorite ones. And I'm sure later, if we got things wrong or where Brad's thinking's going, we can talk about that. And I know Don's told me it's been very useful for him giving talks on Zoom for his mental image stuff. There's a final program. Yes, a final program in 2004. Reinhold, I think from Germany, created Callorama. And I'm kind of embarrassed that I haven't learned or done a lot with this. I believe he shows up at many color labs, or someone does, and demos this program. I've looked at it briefly. It runs on Windows, has a free version, can be fully functional for $65. It does mainstream through A2, has awesome animation, knows the beats, accepts voice input so you can call to it. And it has voice output so it can call to you. And it knows what's legal from where you are. So you don't have to keep hunting and guessing about its knowledge. It is in active development. There's a web page, and I'm hoping when we get to the you guys talk part, we can learn who uses it. In my mind, wow, I'm spacing on her name. She passed away from Nova Scotia, did Kaleidoscope Squares, was a caller teacher, went to high school with my mom.
Gloria Rios.
Gloria Rios Roth. Gloria Roth always, as a caller trainer, newer callers could never get enough mic practice time. And she wanted, way back when in the 70s and 80s, somebody to create a calling program that new callers could practice calling to, and it would show you the dancers moving. And I believe this program does that. I don't know how many people use it for that and how well it works at that. But like, as a new caller, you can't get enough calling and you can't get enough dancers who will dance to you. So why don't we have computer programs that do that? I want to briefly mention that we're talking square dance choreography programs, but how do you store and play your music? There's these three that everybody seems to use and know about. And Dan's on the call, obviously. What have we learned? Many programs, each written for a different purpose, each written with a different goal, each having its own sweet spots. As technology improved and got cheaper, more people were able to create the programs. You didn't have to be you know, an MIT. You didn't have to go to MIT and have access to big computers. The main ones today that I'm aware of are these four. And obviously the idea to create computer programs to create the choreography didn't really take off, but I do have an idea. We covered a lot of attributes a program may have. Here's a long list of them. It depends on what you're looking for. And there's even more, how easy and how good is the user interface, et cetera, et cetera. But I won't read through this because I've gone on long enough. I want to say thanks to Rob French. Rob French wrote a series of articles reviewing many programs. He kind of did this in the 90s and posted on dosido.com. He mailed me all those reviews, and I used that to fill out my knowledge of certain of these programs. And he wrote at the beginning of his page, the use of computers to move checkers is a highly divisive topic that is too complicated to treat here. Suffice it to say that checkers, either physical or on the computer, are a tool and can be well used well, or abused. It's always the responsibility of the caller to check for unusual usages, flow, etc. Computer checker movers are perhaps more prone to abuse because it's easy to just enter calls without paying attention to danceability. And we call this these days clueless clicking. Clicking because you use a mouse, and clueless because you don't really understand what the computer is doing, and so forth. And we should probably say more about that, but I'm not going to right now.
I coined that term.
You good. Yep. One N.
Yes.
Right.
And coined rather than conned, but I think that in the era of autocorrupt, we've learned to correct.
6 of one, half dozen of the other.
That's pretty funny. So I hope you now know more about available choreography programs, what they're good for and what their limitations are, and maybe even why you might want to use them. And I thought of a few things I want to talk about as we discuss later, and that you might want to talk about. What programs have you used? What have you used them for? And how have they helped you as a dancer and a newer caller? That's the end of the talk. So I'm going to unhide my screen so I can see all of you.
Great, thank you, Clark. And with that,
Yes.
we have 10 minutes left till it's up on the hour, so discussions are over. Bye. No, not really. I want to throw in a comment that
Thank you.
Dancerama, what was his name? I can't remember. But anyway, he's originally from Germany. However, he lives in the US now. And has made it very dancer friendly in a lot of features. Although I haven't played with it very much yet, being a Mac person. Somebody say something.
Well, I wanted to throw in a big thank you because the next thing that I have been thinking about for Square Desk is, aside from trying to take Brad's animation data and overlay it on SD, or just go totally to integrating Taminations directly, is thinking about how to store and retrieve sequences and all of that. And of course, that has led to, well, the first thing to do is to take the sequencer, save all that data out, and then be able to reuse those little sub elements as some notion of how can you get from one place to the other, which is kind of where Clark started and how to do that whole writing thing. So it's good to know that a whole lot of people have tried and started with this process over the years, and that it hasn't come to anything that has kind of gained traction, and maybe that should inform where I put my own efforts.
Certainly happy to chat with you about ideas or stuff.
Cool. Yeah, I'd love to have more of those conversations, probably not of general interest at some point.
Clark, in your talk, you mentioned authenticity and well, the computer says it's okay, so is it okay? And you said you'd get to it later and you didn't. That question has come up over the years many, many times about what SD considers legal. I used to all the time get questions on the challenge callers mailing list or various appropriate mailing lists. Is this legal? Well, let's see what SD does. Click, 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 and so on and so forth. And I would get up and say, do not use SD's opinion as authentic, because people would take it as the authority. And since then, I've been working very, very, very hard to make sure that SD, if it is used as an authority, is a correct one. There are certain exceptions, and I was just told I'm doing ramble wrong. And of course, if I do ramble wrong, people will call it and so on and so forth. Is it ramble? Yeah, it was ramble. Whether it's a fold to face or a single wheel. And I got to fix that. It is a fold to face. It is not a single wheel. But anyway, so that question comes up, and people need to know your own judgment is what matters.
Correct. People do go, well, let's see what CSDS does. Let's see what SD does, and take that as the answer. And these days, it's a pretty good answer. I didn't talk about all the programs and how accurate they were, and do they let you do wrong things? Like, what if you call right and left through from lines back to back? But many of the programs would do wrong things. SD, CDSS, CSDS, my program that I used on my list machine, all had to be very accurate because we were using them to write challenge material and actually calling it, not just testing out sequences in a note service.
What is it I'm trying to say? Wade Driver has posted a lot on Facebook groups, and generally not involved with computers, but his tagline very frequently is, just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Yep.
I think that fits with a lot of these things, like what Bill was saying.
So can one of the newer callers speak to what you get out of using a program, especially at Mainstream or Plus?
Well, I'll jump in here. I use Colorama mainly because with limited internet, rural area, I can't do anything online, which is why I don't use Taminations a lot, because you can't download it and then utilize it. I like Colorama because it can give me both the like above view of the little boxes of squares like Tamination does with the little checkers, or I can switch it to be real people, which gives you a different view. It's more of a side view of the people, not necessarily a top view. So I like it for that reason. It has the voice activation with it, which is great. You're able to store your calls and recall them, like your sequences when you write them. I usually put a cue in there as to like if I've used a specific call 3 times. So when I'm teaching a lesson, I can know, oh, I've used this call 3 times in there. I can recall that one, pull it back up, and then use that right away. It gives me a list of all the calls that I can call from that particular formation. It has standardized abbreviations, so I can actually type it in faster now than I can actually verbally say it, which is great. It now has an online interactive feature so that I can, like, if I wanted to meet with somebody else and we wanted to move them to the dancers together, we can do that online. I can do a call, they can do a call, I can do a call. We can go back and forth, and the checkers move that way now. So that's really cool. Tried that out the other day. There's also a Facebook group that I started, callers using Colorama, so that we can kind of all interact and figure out the features of everything. And so we now have 60 some members of that group in a matter of 5 days. So that has taken off well. So I absolutely love Colorama. Since doing all these Zoom sessions, I've learned a lot more about Taminations. Unfortunately, I don't like the fact that it doesn't have the abbreviations, and everybody is struggling to figure out. Like the other day, we were trying to do separate, go around one, make a line, and we could not figure out how to get it wording wise to do that. But I've learned a lot more about how to use that program, and I like that program for certain things too. There's just differences in all these. I started out, when I first started calling, I started using the SD, and I found that really difficult to use. I couldn't print anything off. Nobody could tell me how to do it. So it was like I was missing an instruction manual as to how to get that to work. So there's my 2 cents.
Yeah, it's got a steep learning curve, but it can print. No one knows how.
So
I wanted to throw in something about the features and also about tamination. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe, first of all, that there is a way to download tamination so that you can use it if you don't have a web connection. I think you can download it
Yes,
somehow.
you can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing about taminations, I'm not a tamination user, but from what I gather, you can teach it abbreviations for how you like to input the calls. It has at least some ability to do that. The other feature that was talked about a little bit was teaching the program new calls. Now that's not teaching it new abbreviations, but it's actually teaching it new calls that it didn't know how to do before. The only one I know of that really does that is Vic Cedar's CSDS. In Bill Ackerman's program, you can do it by editing his database that comes with the program. But I think that's to make changes in there is really above most people's comprehension. Anyway, that's all I know about the features there.
I hadn't known anything about Colorama until what Clark just said about it just now. And it sounds like it's a really, really nice program and a really good complement to the program, to my program and Vic's program. It handles all the things that we don't, and vice versa.
And I will also note that from looking at the database for SD, I suspect that adding new calls is something that would take quite a steep learning curve to figure out.
It has a steeper learning curve than anything else having to do with SD. When sometimes people send me mail, how do I add this call? And I say, copy and paste this into the
SD abides by the motto, which was the unofficial motto of that company, Symbolics, that Clark and some of us used to work for. But I think the SD program, which is my favorite, at least I use it all the time, goes by the motto of we make hard problems easy and vice versa.
Yeah. And I would say the motto of the SD database is no user serviceable parts inside.
So we've heard from Janet as far as a newer caller and what she uses. Any other of the newer non-techie callers use any of, as Clark was asking, use any of the particular checker pusher programs or tried and given up because of steep learning curves? Oh, come on, speak up, somebody.
Okay, I'll say something. Somebody showed me Caller Angels, which they still use regularly, and they think it's fantastic. But it was, what was it? It didn't flow. It just jumped from one thing to another, so you couldn't follow the flow, and I found that was quite difficult. Couldn't remember the codes either. Hang on, it's my clock's going. I'll turn it off for now and come back.
I have.
She said, turn my clock off and then come back.
Yeah, I used Callers Angels before too. That's the first one I ever used. And that's when you could actually talk to Bill Fott, call him up on the phone. I don't know where he is anymore. And I don't know where my copy of Callers Angels went either. But it was you learn the abbreviations in it. I found it to be pretty fast. Bill Davis wrote a bunch of macros for it that did the advanced calls, and I acquired those. You could, everything was in terms of money, but you paid for it. But Bill supported the program. Both Bills did, and there was some local knowledge about it, so it was the thing to use. My next exposure to checker pushing programs after a long hiatus from square dance programming was CSDS, which I bought with, in order to manage dances and everything else. And it's a very good system. And one thing that it does is it will provide you like printouts of where it's been. You'll see all of the calls and what the formations were before and after. But as other people are pointing out about a lot of these checker pushing programs and callers whatsoever, it still doesn't, but it's very useful. And I've been exposed to SD. I saw it out there and I used it a couple of times, but it never caught on with me because there were so many other things available by that time. And now currently using Taminations mostly because Don's been using it for his MI classes. And it works really well. And it's nice to run it and look at the animations. And I think it's a great teaching tool. Every time I teach a class, I give a link to the dancers and say, you got to go here and you'll learn a lot. I learned a lot using Callers Angels that way in the old days too.
I found that a downside of Taminations is it runs on these little tiny handheld. So it used to be that during a break in your class, people would come up to you and ask you, to explain something. And now during the break in the class, they go off on the side, fuss with their smartphone, and then come back. No, you're wrong. You're wrong. Tamination says blah 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 blah. You're all wrong. And you lose control of the class.
Yes, I've been criticized for degrading square dance because people now use their phones too much during the square dance.
Does anybody on the call use Callorama and call to it? And how well does that work, especially as a practice calling mechanism?
I use it and I like it very much. One of the things that I do is I'll call a sequence out, the whole sequence out, basically the whole tip. And then I will play it. And as I play it, I will call to that, and you can put your, I use Square View, you can put it on for the music. So it gives you timing, and you just call as it's just before it lights up, so that, and the dancers flow smoothly like dancers, rather than when you're calling to it, it's sort of a stop and go.
Clark, Janet already answered your question that she uses it a lot, just as Rich just
What
said.
does she call to it?
Yes, I do.
Great.
I
Okay.
like it. I mean, it's easy because it's the language that you use when you're calling to dancers. There's no
Exactly.
trying to figure out what do I say, because it's the same language you would say to the dancers.
So here's an interesting thing. Almost none of these programs can I either type or call to them and say, join hands, circle left. Because where does that end? It doesn't. They're circling. Alaman left, do an Alaman left while they're in motion. Right and left grand, promenade home. Or almost any of our old circle choreography. I mean, the programs can kind of do Alaman left to an Alaman thar, maybe, and so forth. But the programs definitely force you into, and square dancing into, a very gridded 2x4 rectangle, 1x8 this or whatever type shape. And that kind of gets to a point that I made with Vic Cedar. I chatted with him before I prepared this talk. And he and I both do a lot of contra dancing, not calling, but dancing. And we know there's probably no contra dance sequencer out there that really, where you could feed in, like, all contra dances have names and authors and they're all 64 beats long usually. And if I type in that short piece of choreography, there's nobody out there that has a program that could dance through all that choreography. And Vic and I both know how hard that would be. And that's because contra dancing and the calls and terms are a lot fudgier than square dancing. They're a lot more like our circle choreography and four boys promenade inside and get back home, and where's the exact ending position of those things. So I think that's an interesting thing to think about. Same thing with round dancing earlier. Do we have any program out there where I could feed in round dance cue sheets and watch a program dance it? The answer is no. I mean, that stuff is hard. We're lucky in square dancing that it's so gridded and you know, mechanical. And that's just something to think about.
It's a miracle of modern Western square dancing that it is amenable to being done on a computer the way very few activities are. You know, you can't write symphonies on a computer either. We just happen to be in the middle of in an activity that happens to work well with computers, and it's a miracle actually.
And that's an interesting comment that you make, Clark, because it's one that I get, and I don't use a lot of computer programs, but I was asked this about Colorama, I was asked this about SD, I was asked this about Taminations, and I know absolutely nothing about the programming. Even in this chat, I was asking Brad a couple of questions, which the answer was very, very simple to, and it just never twigged on me because of how it's worded. But most of the programs don't do, I'm a brand new caller, here's my first night dancing, you know, circle left, halfway, Alaman left, or ladies center, men's sachet, or make a right hand start, boys in the middle, make a right hand. Those things that you would use very, very early to fill, to time, to work a floor of new dancers. But once you get past the initial basic concepts of moving the dancers around, they flow really, really well with the complex choreography. And it's almost as if the simple choreography, or what we consider the simple choreography, is the hardest to write for a computer to understand.
I'm going to say that with Colorama, if you call circle left and then you don't say anything for a while, it circles all the way around and then it will stop. If you do like a single file promenade and you don't say any particular call immediately, it will circle once around and it will stop. Same like when you say boy star and you don't say how far to go, it will go once around the circle and then stop.
Yeah, well, that would be a normal default. It's like saying square through, it's a default to 4.
When you do that first night of stuff, circle left, do an element left, knowing the timing of that, you just have to learn that. It's not easy, and no computer program can help you. Janet, what you said, Colorama does, it's cheating. You need to learn how to time it. You need to watch the dancers, and no computer program can possibly help you know when to call the element left or what to say after a four ladies promenade.
I wanted to throw in a similar comment, which is that for the new callers, now I'm going to, Mel said time filling and whatever, and I know that he didn't really mean that. It's the circle choreography, that we're talking about, all this old timey circle to the left and the sachet stuff and the chains and the stars. That's really good choreography that dancers enjoy doing. They don't like to do it at C4 because that's not what they're into. But that stuff is not to be discounted, and it's not just throwaway material. That's good stuff. I just wanted to drive that home for the newer callers.
Absolutely. The terms I'm using is, when you're filling the time on the floor is, for instance, circle to the left, shuffle your feet and walk to the beat, circle to the right, just getting to flip back and forth, or a ladies center men's sachet while you're doing a circle, or an Alaman left to an Alaman dar. Someone said, right pull by, turn the next one left to an Alaman dar. Things like that must be incredibly difficult. I'm not a computer programmer, but they must be incredibly difficult to program. And most of that you can actually visualize in your head exactly what the dancers are doing. It's just once you get past that, seems to be where the programs are written. And that's where a lot of the questions I get. And I'm sending, I see Brad online there. I don't use the other programs. I use Taminations online. And I'm assuming the others are like that. I sent Brad an email about blacking out all the dancers except one that you want to follow on Don Beck's. I think it was there by the next morning. Most of them are very, very responsive to that. It's just a matter of, if you got somebody new and they're asking a question, I have no idea to answer it. And the other thing I would like to say is I have learned more about how to give commands to computer programs like Taminations since we started here, because a lot of them are worded very, very specifically and you can't figure it out, and very, very stupid things. We spent a whole session saying, oh, the dancers can't promenade, the dancers can't promenade. So we just, square the set. Type the word home after it. I found out today. Promenade home, and they do it. and it's animated. It's just not realizing that that's in there.
Well, I just added that recently.
I was just going to say, that's why I appreciated throughout the whole set of programs that have ever been created, the ones that can show you what it knows how to do from where you are, what your possibilities are much more usable than the ones that where you have to type in the abbreviations and get it exactly right.
I never use abbreviations anyway, even when I write.
Brad, you were gonna talk?
Yes, I did.
And let me just add something about, circle left and all that kind of stuff. You have to learn how to do it by watching a square called by a competent caller, have the caller coach you in how to do it. When I was starting out, I spent a significant amount of time learning how to say the words element left to an element there, go forward to, go right, left, and the boy swing in, got a backup star, shoot that star, so that it times out and the dancers can do it. That no computer program can help you with that. You need to learn how to time this stuff so it sounds like a professional caller and the dancers can do it. And until I practiced that, the dancers could not do it when I called simple figures like that. Let's shut up, everyone else.
Well, while we're being quiet, just throw in, am I muted? No, just a piece of, when Clark was talking about history, people started way back Clark because he was interested in doing it, and then wrote a different program because he was interested in using it to write choreography. When I wrote Desktop Dancer, not being a programmer, but interested in computers, I said, when HyperCard was introduced, oh, this is cool, I could do something. Oh, I could do something with square dancing. And it was just a cool thing to do. It wasn't a square dance tool for me. But it was, it kept my mind going, as many of these conversations do. I guess I would like to comment about Taminations. There are downloadable versions for my iPhone and for Android. And if you're using a full computer, most people, I guess I just heard there was a downloadable version, but most people use it online, just streaming. And there's a great advantage to that. You're always using the latest version of it. And Brad is constantly making updates. Like Mel said, he just recently added that feature that made it nice for me when teaching mental image. When you're using something online, you've got the latest version all the time, no matter what platform you're on.
I've seen Brad fix a bug while we were talking about it.
So earlier in the talk, I mentioned calling with a purpose. And that was one of the problems that my automatic choreography generator didn't do. I think callers need to do that too. You kind of have a sequence, you get in, head square through 4, swing through, boys run. Where are you headed and what are you trying to do? Maybe you want to feature something. Maybe you want them to do a follow your neighbor where it's not the boys going in. Maybe you want to feature a call. There's got to be a reason why you're moving them around other than just moving them around. I think that makes better sequences. In fact, the whole tip may have kind of a theme about it. Maybe you're theming some call combination from a variety of positions. I don't know, but it's kind of like if you had a computer program try to write music, it kind of doesn't know a lot about why you're writing music. So when you're calling, think about that. Why, and when you're writing sequences, try to think about it. I usually have some sort of get in, you do something hard, like maybe it goes uphill and then it gets a little easy and it does another little hump and then it resolves. and don't make it too long. I don't know. I just think that's one of the places where the sequencer kind of failed.
It occurs to me, learning how to, the first, as I think about my progression of calling, the first thing was learning how to call standard position stuff. And then it was learning how not to call standard position stuff, or how to, yeah, I think you get what I mean. But one of the things that I'm thinking about in the learning to call consciously with an intention there is trying to find ways to talk a little bit more about narrative structure and dramatic structure, where we pace so that we start with something that brings people in, but is an inciting incident in the language of movie scripts, and then takes them through the various ups and downs of challenge and release and drama and tension on that. And I'm not sure how to do that, but I'm going to ask some of my old former coworkers at Pixar if anybody's willing to do a Saturday morning talk on dramatic structure.
I will say that for a challenge tip, I usually start with a so-called opening biggie, a short sequence. And then I have piles of easy, medium, and hard material, or what I hope or believe is going to be easy, medium, and hard. The easy are usually old sequences I've used before, so I'm aware of them. I don't really grade them. I just kind of take a quick look and go, that looks yucky, you know, too many phantoms, too much this, too long, and put it in a pile. And then I will call an easy sequence, hey, they got it. A medium sequence, hey, they're doing pretty good. Another medium sequence, yeah, they're doing good. Hard sequence, I broke down some squares. Go back to a medium, do another hard. Oh, I have a theme I want to do. We're going to do, you know, the twisted thing. I'll do a couple of twisted, I'll do a medium, and then I try to end on a winner. And it's the ending on a winner when the, 10 minutes are up that can be a problem, because you lose too many squares, you've lost their confidence, they've lost their confidence, etc. So that's the within a tip drama that I try to create for virtually all my tips. Throughout an evening, especially when I'm calling a weekend with, say, Vic, and I'm like, oh, you start, because I know he's going to give him a good flowy, danceable start, and then I'll do something. But if I talk to him later and I'm not careful, he'll be frustrated with me as the co-caller on the stage, because we usually do 2 tips and 2 tips. He'll get them up and dancing and going, and now you can do stuff with them. And if I call too hard and break them down, then he can't do the material he wants, because he has to get their confidence back and get them going again. So there's the whole arc, the story arc, throughout a dance, throughout a tip, and throughout a sequence. And then, as Jim Mayo would say, there's all the micro programming decisions you make if you're just sight calling a sequence. As what you call next in the moment, you're making decisions there. So it's a fascinating thing that we callers do.
The words you were looking for, Dan, was programming and micro programming inside of a dance.
I would like to, actually, I don't want to, but I feel I should interrupt momentarily here. I usually do it on the hour. It's 20 after the hour. I want to make an official closing and say that if people want to fade away because they're zoomed out, don't feel embarrassed by it, we'll understand, but hopefully we'll continue the conversation. But so the usual credits at the end. Dan, thank you again for pushing and pulling the switches. Clark, thank you for the great presentation and for the getting people's interest up. And again, to all of you guys for showing up, adding to the conversation, showing interest, nodding appropriately when you're supposed to. I think it's been another educational in its own way and entertaining Saturday morning. And with that, and again, if you feel you must leave, You don't have to apologize, but please hang around because I have a feeling this conversation is going to go a bit further. And one of the things, well, Clark, now I'm throwing in my 3 cents worth, 1 cent at a time. Clark was just mentioning how he programs an evening or a tip or a dance with the difficulties and the peaks and what have you at a challenge dance. That's also very applicable to a mainstream dance, you know, and the things that Clark said, the newer callers should keep that in mind, is build success, build confidence, challenge, drop back, check out the level that they're capable of and such. So that's one conversation I want to keep going. And I do have a question for Brad after that, but Brad, as far as I can tell, originally Taminations was pretty much a definitions and helping dancers understand, this is my observations, helping dancers understand what calls did and the various formations they could be done from, etc. And my curiosity is, when and why did you add the sequencer, which fits more into the topic conversations we have here? And I'm glad you did.
Sure. Yeah. So in fact, since I'm started out as a dancer and didn't get into calling until quite recently, I wrote Taminations as an aid for dancers rather than callers, is how it started. And that's because there wasn't really much at the time. You know, we talked about all this software to help callers, but there really wasn't much of anything to help dancers. So that was the real motivation for Taminations. And it's still, I think the primary goal of Taminations is still to help the dancers, and the sequencer just sort of got tacked on quite a bit later as just something more to help beginner callers, because that's sort of what I was and really still am, to help see how to get the dancers around and see how they moved around, and practice some short sequences and see how the flow and the handhold works using the animations.
Well, I'm glad you did. I suspect the sequencer was also, I'm just guessing, because you had all the definitions in, that it was too difficult to continue from there.
Yeah.
In the old days, you know, we had to pass out booklets that we had to buy, and then we had to get people to read them, and there were a lot of different dictionaries that you could refer people to. But now with Taminations, basically every dancer has usually in their pocket, a complete dictionary with animated pictures and everything. And I just think it's the greatest thing since sliced bread.
Right.
The on the topic of the story arc of your calling, something for the new callers that you might want to do is that now at Challenge we break the dancers down a lot more, and Clark was talking about sort of managing that, whatever. Of course, at mainstream and regular levels, you really don't want anybody to go down, but depending on if they seem like they're having trouble, or if, heaven forbid, some squares get broken down, never end the tip when you have broken down squares, because the people that are broken down, that's the last thing they're going to remember about the tip. And if you're only doing a tip or two, that might be the last thing they remember about you, is that guy that broke us down. So you might want to have in the back pocket of your mind, when you're starting out, and maybe you're just doing guest tips even or something, make sure that you have a sequence that's going to be easy to do, bulletproof, guaranteed, fail-safe, idiot-proof sequence that's fun to do and fairly short, pretty short. Have that available in however you prepare your material, written material or memorized or whatever. Make sure you have this trump card, and if you get in trouble, call that as your last sequence, so that you so that everybody on the floor ends on a winner. That's just my advice.
You leaving, Daryl? You haven't said anything all day.
You're
You're
muted, Daryl.
muted. You're muted,
You're
Daryl.
muted, Daryl. You're not going to unmute, Daryl?
He's just leaving.
Daryl, we don't read lips. Unmute. Thank
There we
you.
go.
I was pushing my space bar and I thought probably unmuted, but it didn't. Yeah, I was about ready to leave, and I didn't want to interrupt everybody just to say goodbye, but very, very nice presentation, Clark. Coming from someone that is strictly a computer user in the simplest sense. I remember when Bill Davis came up to me at a convention somewhere and said, Daryl, which one of the Square Dance programs you using? I said, I don't use one. You don't use Caller's Angel? I said, no. And I never really got into it because I figured if I had to ask it something and it had to come from here to begin with, why have a program? And if I had one question about all this is, and I do like terminations, it's probably the best thing I've seen, and I've seen very little in the way of these programs. I've just never gone out of my way to find them, but I do like the terminations. But do I have to write all this stuff down at the end of it in order to use it? And that's always where my brain goes, is why I can think of a combination and I can go to my dolls, or I can go to termination, look at it, see how it works. Once I know it works, it's in my head, and I have it to use. Not good at reading while I'm calling. So that's just an observation from my point of view. But so nice to see everybody, all my old friends, and I use old in just about any way that you can imagine it. Thanks, everybody. Have a good one, and I will see you again on screen, if not another way sometime. Bye-bye.
Good to see you, Daryl.
Well, there's a natural silence.
Scott, you're muted.
Let me grab Scott and see if I can ask him to unmute.
He's looking for it.
Okay.
Catch you later, team.
Later, John.
Okay,
Well,
Scott's
I have-
unmuted. Talk, Scott.
I should be unmuted. I'm holding my space
Yes.
bar down.
Yep,
You
you're
are
unmuted.
unmuted.
Okay. I started in the late 70s calling. So all of these things, all of these programs were being produced during that period of time. At least Clark's stuff was. And Clark would tell me about it. As a matter of fact, I built a Linux box so that I could use a compiler for Lisp, so I could use some of his programs. And so it's like I remember being introduced to all of these programs at the beginning. Now, I found I didn't really have much use for them. I used SD. I used, of course, I always recommend to my dancers and to other callers to use terminations, but I don't really, I haven't really had a use for them except for curiosity speaking, just to check them out, see if they work. I first was introduced into programs with Clark Baker and his Lisp programs, and that's where I started working on them. But that was about it. That was the last I remember. But this is a very interesting topic, and Clark did a fabulous job on the talk, I believe. So the history was pretty correct because I remember all of those.
Thank you. Yeah, I wanted to try to write it down because people are going to start forgetting it. So you lived it, which is interesting, but you're also a good professional caller and you don't really need or use them, but they're of interest to you because they relate to your profession.
Yes, exactly.
So Clark, I have a copy of A Computer Square Dancer by John Sawalski.
Yes,
Is that what you were looking for?
that's what I was looking for.
Okay, I'll scan
So
it. Send it
I
to
know
you.
that Rob French and I would each appreciate having a new copy of it again.
Okay, is a scan okay? I can just
Scan's
scan
fine
it
by
in?
me. In fact, my thesis is, I think, up on a website somewhere. I don't know if scanning it and putting it up would violate anybody's copyright, given that John's no longer around and Jill's no longer around. And, you know, I bet you just put it up somewhere. That'd be great.
Okay,
I would love to host that scan on
Okay.
one of my websites.
Okay,
I
I'll
want a
scan it.
copy of it too. Does it have the source code?
I don't think so.
I think that's what they're talking about when they say a scan. I believe it has to have the source code with it.
No.
Not
They're just talking
necessarily.
about, she's just talking about the document format.
I'm just talking about running it through a scanner with an OCR on it.
Yeah, because otherwise you're going to get TJ6 or Scribe or something. she's got a printout of it basically.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing is that thesis may or may not include the source code. It may just be English prose.
I don't think it's long enough here to have included the source code. Although,
Do you see anything with a lot of funny angle brackets?
yeah. No, I know how it does not have source code. It does have the call definitions used by the dancing program or examples of it. No source code.
Oh, well.
Yep. I just want a sense of how far did he get? What could it really do? Because remember, none of the programs really understand square dancing in a deeper sense, except for, I think, SD.
Yeah, the something that didn't get mentioned because now we're getting into stuff that's really quite nerdy is how the programs work internally. And there's basically two approaches, and one of them is that the thing has a database of before and after pictures, and as you call along, it matches those up. And the other way of doing it is for the program to actually have some idea in a computer's way of thinking about how the dancer does the call, what's the definition of the call, and have the thing actually manipulate checkers essentially and come out with the answer. But it's not pre-computed. And the latter way that I just said is a lot more flexible, but it's also a lot more difficult. Most of the programs do the pattern matching thing, and they work quite well. That's why the descriptions say doesn't do phantoms, does a lot of the phantom stuff, maybe not all of it or what have you. SD, Bill's program, actually quote unquote knows how to do the calls, and the way it works is it tries to do the calls, and if it doesn't work out, then it gives you an error message that says, oh, can't do the call from here. Anyway, that's just sort of a nerdy detail. I'm not sure how VIX works. I think it's before and after pictures, but I'm not sure.
I think VIX is more before after pictures with some code for concepts.
I think SD is at one extreme end of that continuum. And I think Clark's program started out at the choreographed or your list machine thing was at the other end of the
Yep.
Other end of that continuum when it started out, and other programs have been near that side of the continuum. And VIX is mostly at your end, but a little bit at my end.
I wanted to throw in one other thing about the authenticity issue or the correctness issue of the programs. I've really only used one of the programs, but something to consider is if you put in a sequence and you do a call there, is the computer showing you the right answer for how that is really supposed to come out? And what Bill's program tries to do is it tries to be correct, but at the same time, it has some concessions in it to do this is what everybody means, even if it's not exactly what the definition says. And so if you're a new caller and you're running the program and you want to see what the right answer is, because you're not sure if you were pushing the checkers, you're maybe not totally sure where you would put them because you don't really know exactly what that definition means. Well, let's run it through the program and see. You still have to be careful because I don't know about the other programs, but at least some of them are not always exactly correct, but they will at the same time follow common practice. And I'm looking at you, Fold.
Exactly. I was going to say exactly that thing. The call fold is the poster child for this problem. Everyone knows, quote unquote. First of all, the caller lab definitions say the foldee does not move. The folder moves to face where the foldee is. Everyone knows that at mainstream, callers will call, heads square through 4, touch a quarter, split, circulate, whatever. Boys fold, double pass through, or better yet, just lines back to back. You got lines back to back, lead right circle to a line, everybody pass through. Boys fold. Now, precisely, the boys are facing the girls exactly who have not moved. You are not in the 2x4 matrix. Star through, couple circulate. Everyone at a mainstream dance, everyone knows how to do that. And it's wrong. And everyone knows it's right, even though it's wrong. And people just call it that way. SD has a huge amount of complexity to deal with that particular issue.
I think
Color lab definitions have an unpublished section on square breathing that also covers exactly those cases. And you're right, they're kind of a pain. You actually touched on something I wanted to mention again, as a dancer and a newer caller. This happened to me and it was painful, but it was worth learning. And that is, Bill just gave a sequence real quick. And the question is, can you follow choreography in your head as opposed to pushing checkers through it? So I was driving places, being driven to dances by, for example, Mike Tursoff. And he was either teaching me new calls or teaching me how calls at the next level worked. And he'd go, okay, we do head square through 4, touch a quarter. Do you know where you are? Well, Bill just did one, head square through 4. And mentally, I can follow that and know where I am as man number 1 and that the square is in a normal 8 chain through. Touch a quarter, I now know I'm the end of the wave looking in and we're in ocean waves. And I know the boys are looking in. Split circulate, I know the boys are looking out.
What?
Boys fold, I knew what he was setting up without saying I have a number 2 right-hand ocean wave or something like that. That ability to follow formations and your part in a formation mentally has been invaluable for me, since the 70s. It was painful to get there, but it was worth learning or acquiring.
I apologize for calling this mental stuff real fast. The intention was that you've all heard callers say things just use words that sound like what I was saying. You've all heard callers say, blah, 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 fold, touch a quarter, fold, swing through, fold, star through, couple circulate. That sequence, whether you can follow it in your head, everybody's heard that kind of sequence and knows that when they hear fold and followed by star through, you better be facing that person, followed by swing through, adjust to whatever it is you need. People do that all the time. You don't need to follow exactly what I said, though I think that was correct.
I do it all the time. I listen to a sequence and I follow through the sequence in my head. I can see where the dancers are, where I am as the number 1 man in the square. So I do that all the time. And I find that helps me a lot when I'm teaching callers classes, because I can do that.
I do it all the time for a different reason, namely that I've heard those words and I know, oh yeah, we're in this setup. It's a little fudgy. I'm going to call a swing through and the fudginess is going to go away because the dancers know how to do it. The dancers know what what I'm about to say means.
Okay, well, then I'd like to say something as a new caller. I barely was able to picture the thing when you said fold there, because it was just a little bit too quick for me. I got lost somewhere. I didn't know who was looking out and who was looking in after we'd done the split circulate. So that's exactly why terminations has been such a fantastic help. First, when I learned to dance, of course, you went home and you studied your terminations to remember the calls that you'd just been taught. I thought that was fantastic. It worked very well for me, but I do have some people I'm now teaching who can't make any sense of terminations. It doesn't help them. That's fine. They have other things. We still give them handouts so they can look at the pages if they want to, but that was great for me. And then of course, when I started calling, just exactly to be able to, when someone says something like that, you know, sort of put it into the sequencer and see how things work. That is the greatest help when you're a new caller. And now I've been doing this for a little while. Some of these things I can follow, but still I get lost. And so that's when termination is really a very good help and something that I don't think I'd be anywhere without terminations. That's just great. And now I also have to take this opportunity to ask something. Why is it called terminations?
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, first,
Tam twirlers.
Yes. Well, thank you. Yes, the club that I dance with and I learned dancing is the Tam Twirlers of Marin County in California. And it's called the Tam Twirlers after our nearby landmark, Mount Tamalpais, the highest point in Marin County, which is nicknamed just as Mount Tam. So that's how the club got its named the Tam Twirlers. And so when I started the program, I wanted some catchy names. So it's Tam Twirlers Animations, merge them together and get Taminations. And so it's lucky I came up with a nice brand name that people can attach to, which is a little catchier than some of the other program names.
Okay, thanks.
And the other comment is that I've heard that before, is that while Taminations is quite successful, a lot of people really like it, there are some people who says as well, you know, I look at these figures and I see these little squares and circles moving around, just doesn't mean anything to me. You know, different people learn in different ways, and it's I don't think it's the fault of Taminations that not everybody finds it the greatest thing. So you just have to be able to adapt to things, and that's why in Taminations I have different ways you can play. You can drag a slider, you can read the definition, so that helps to some degree as well.
Yeah, that's something for new people who are teaching a class to be aware of. Is I'm sure you know, every people, like you just said, everybody learns in different ways. But if you're teaching a class and you give somebody Taminations, you know, you show it to them or get them to download it or whatever. So they got Taminations and they don't like it because they're just not a diagrammatic overhead view icon type person, and they just can't relate to that. Make sure that you have some other resource. There are places on the web where you can go and look at video recordings, you know, YouTube recordings of people doing the moves just for this purpose. So don't be careful not to scare anybody off that's in your class and make them think that they have to understand how to do it with diagrams. If they wanted supplemental material, there's also YouTube videos that you might refer them to.
I have to tell you, Brad, that it irritated me that you called it Taminations. I really wanted it to be called Adobe Squares.
You should make a version that has all the definitions of all the calls, including the wrong ones, and you could call it Burl summations.
Right.
To answer Daryl's question now that he's gone, Taminations does allow you to copy and print the sequences you've created. I think he complained that it's good, I see them moving, but I can't print it out. If you go to, believe it is settings and then push copy, it'll put it in your clipboard and you can paste it into a word processor.
But also one of his points is he's not a reader. So he basically has to get it. If he's writing a cool module or something, He has to do it, get it into his head, and then he calls it from memory. So, which is not something, that's something I think a lot of the older callers had done in the past. It's certainly not something I can do.
So Terminations was named after a mountain? Cool.
No, it was named after a club
A club which was named after a mountain.
in
Yes.
Marin County.
Yes.
It was named after a mountain.
Yes.
Yeah, my Marin County club, my Adobe Squares, didn't have a program.
I have actually driven up Mount Tamalpais and I think done some rock climbing on some of the sandstone outcroppings on the side of it. It's not a very large mountain, but it is compared to everything else around it.
Somebody should make a checker program that uses little puppets and does stop action, and then you could call it Marionations.
So I wanted to mention one other thing along choreography lines. So I don't write choreography anymore. But when I was writing, especially at Challenge, I have stacks, huge stacks of material that I've written, lots of material. And most of it's on the computer now because ever since I started writing, I often would type it in and then print it out. And then I wrote on computer programs and saved it. So I have a belief that if I wanted to write a new program that could generate programs or generate choreography at a given level in the Clark Baker style, or one that could take a bunch of Vic sequences and generate new material in the Vic Cedar style, or maybe Scott style. We couldn't deliver it with Scott style, but we could make the material be in Scott style. I think that if we took pairwise frequencies of from this place, Clark calls this call at C2 this often, I wouldn't be surprised if simple pairwise frequencies would kind of generate a infinite length amount of material in that style. I've never done that, but were I to get back into calling and needing to write material, that would be one of the things that I would do.
And you could call the program Square Ruts.
Square Ruts, yeah. No, that would be great. Square Ruts is what we need.
I know you talked about that for many years, Clark, about writing Lee Kottman choreography versus writing Clark choreography versus writing Ackerman choreography and such. And someday maybe we should talk about your frequency counts and the sequence counts and analyzing that, but I think not today.
One of the challenges I've faced is with the SD interface, I'm feeding stuff into SD. And when you save from SD, you don't get a file that you can feed back into SD.
Right, yeah.
So I'm working on clarifying all of that. I've got some Perl scripts, which will do it to a generic one, kind of. But yes, the notion of being able to take any sequence you put in SD, break it apart, and then look for the Markov chains that probability weighted seems like really cool.
Yeah, I want to get back to that example that of the new caller and the fold thing, just to beat that dead horse one last time. It was head square through 4, so you have a corner box, and you do the touch a quarter. I'm going to do a different example than the one Bill did. So you do the touch a quarter. The boys are looking in, the girls are looking out, and we have the girls fold. That means since they're looking out, they're going to fold behind the boys. And if you picture this in your head, you can see that that the dancers are now offset, that they're in a column type formation, a beginning double pass through type formation, but they're not lined upright. They're off, they're off to the side of each other. And so the issue of fold is when you have formations of that sort where people are offset and then you have them do some call, where do they really end? And if you were to call another call after that, where does that one really end? And fold is notorious for this because people frequently, very commonly call it wrong, technically wrong, according to the definition and according and challenge dancers are going to obey that definition very strictly. So at the conclusion of that kind of choreography, the dancers are going to be in some pretty weird formation, offset from each other. They're not in normal lines or waves, but they're, you know, distorted in some funny way. At very commonly at Mainstream and Plus, callers will just expect the dancers to just magically know to adjust back into a normal formation, and they're going to do that because they're in a formation they don't understand. This is a weird place to be, and at the first opportunity they're going to fix it, and they're going to get back in a normal formation. And technically that choreography is wrong. However, it's very commonly done. Now, if you're typing this into a computer program, the computer program could go either way. It could do the adjustment that dancers are prone to do for you, and that might mislead you into thinking that that's actually correct. It will not mislead you into thinking that might be what the dancers really do, but depending on how much you care about the definition and that sort of thing, that's a judgment call for you. Now, the program may or may not do it one way. It may do it the correct way, or it may do it the fudgy way. Bill's SD program, it depends on the level that you tell it you're calling, whether or not it does it the fudgy way or the technically correct way. I think Taminations actually does it the correct way all the time, but that's just something to be aware of, and something that you have to know that's more than the computer knows, and something also, once you know what the issue is a judgment call for you. Do you want to call that? Anyway, so that's what that example was about. I just wanted to run it by one time.
Yeah.
For the new.
You're absolutely right, Chris. The
And I apologize.
example was that fold, for instance, from a corner box, boys fold. If you say star through after, boys cross fold rather than recycle, because boys cross fold star through, and you expect lines, they're going to be offset lines. I believe, Brad, you have an adjust to a line function. Others do it, but dancers will naturally do it normally if you just say forward and back.
Well,
And that's an intuitive thing that you have to learn as a caller.
I handled that problem with my challenge group. I was doing some challenge calling, but my dancers were serious challenge people, would know the difference and try to be totally correct. And I used to say, do this, do that. Now fudge to lines and do this, or fudge to a column and do this. And they understood, and they would make that correction and be aware of the fact that I knew the difference, but I didn't want to get into that offset at that point. And
I apologize for the example in which I sort of expected you to track the stuff in your head. The point is that not that I want you to be able to track that stuff in your head, but that you need to know what it sounds like, what sorts of things you hear a caller say, and know how to say it correctly. And when you get some experience that you can't get from a computer, you know how to do that fold and swing through, or, to make that fudginess magically go away. The dancers know how to make it magically go away. You need to know how to make it magically go away in a way that's comfortable for them. And that's just judgment you need to learn. And, once you listen to, go to dancers and hear how callers call it, it just becomes second nature. That's, yeah, I can fold. Yeah, touch a quarter, centers trade. They weren't next to each other. Of course they were. Centers trade, and then swing, all that kind of stuff.
I'll tell you how I sleep at night, which is that I always want to call things that are always really correct, and I don't want to get the dancers in the habit of making fudgy adjustments, because then what's going to happen when they go to a caller who calls it correctly? They're going to have a problem. They might never go to such a caller, but that's just what I think. So the thing to bear in mind, though, is that the dancers will do what you tell them, and if you use some helping words that indicate that that it's fudgy and you want them to do it anyway, that's okay, because that's essentially like giving them another call. The call being fudge to a wave. Right? You don't even have to be quite that blatant about it. But you could say star through, make lines up to the middle and back. Make lines is a call. It's not on the list, but what it means is you got something that's close to lines, and they ought to be lined up normal, and you're expecting to go forward and back. So make lines. So if I call something like that, I'll say something explicit, hopefully subtle, that indicates, you know, exactly what I want them to do. Whether they notice it going by or not, whatever. But that's how I sleep at night.
Well, that's
Speaking
in
of
the
sleep,
basic program. Sorry, go ahead.
speaking of sleeping at night, we've gone way over an hour, and I want to mention a reminder to everyone in the US that we get an extra hour's sleep tonight. So that extra hour is well spent here.
Used.
Actually, I had been looking around. I don't think we have any of our Arizona callers left here. I want to change the subject because I'm curious. This is a history lesson. We have somebody on that has had a long history of computers and a long history of square dancing. And Chris Jensen, I'm wondering how you have seen the two and blended the two and evolved through the various applications across the times.
Well, sorry, Don, I just posted to the chat that it's time for Sue Curtis's dance. So you guys went for 2 hours and I'm gonna go dance. So
Okay.
you know, I've seen a lot of changes. Obviously, I collect old stuff like Sobalski's dissertation and or thesis. And I started with your program back in the day because I used a Mac. I actually, when I was teaching myself, when I was learning to call, I actually was writing software to do the calls just using a graphic program that I was working on at the time. And that helped me a lot when I was learning, you know, formation management because I was, and how the calls worked because I was writing code to do the calls, but not in any systematic way like these programs did. But you know, so I've changed, you know, and I went from SD to using a VIX program, which I still use all the time.
Sorry, I didn't interrupt the conversations earlier and ask you
Yeah,
to do
yeah,
that.
but I'm taking off to go do a little dancing here. So
That's
thanks
good.
all. Great session. Thanks, Clark. Always nice to see you.
You're welcome.
Okay, I gotta leave too. Bye.
Just to remind everybody that is international, that time change does affect when you come in for this session, especially, as well as the other sessions. So make sure you make the adjustment on your clocks. Otherwise, you're going to be showing up an hour early or an hour late. We've already done our adjustments over here. So.
Well, in California, we have no dancing going on, so it doesn't matter to me.
No, it's just a matter of whether or not you log on at 10 o'clock and they started at 9 o'clock or vice versa.
Yep, exactly.
We've had both kinds at my mental image classes. One person that came a day late, another person that came a day early.
How about $1 short?
Well, the day early was fine. She just had to sit there for 24 hours until I see she was on this group and it just dropped off. Just had to sit there for, oh, I'm sorry, Carol, I didn't see you up in the corner. Just sat there for 24 hours waiting. It was worth being patient for.
Who put Carol in the corner?
Zoom did. What else is interesting, Clark?
I was just reading a little bit of the beginning of John's thesis. I don't know. I mean, I hit most of the stuff that I thought would be interesting. Obviously, technology's changed hugely over the years. Many of us have lived through all that. The price of computers, you know, coming way down. The graphics getting better and better. I mean, really, almost some of the stuff like the guts of SD and even the guts of CSDS could be in the, you know, using computer terminology in these days, APIs, application program interfaces, that bigger, better programs that do more can just call, so that whenever you need, when you're here and need the dancers to do something, you just call here, it does it and comes back and shows that that program, the hard complicated stuff can be encapsulated, and we can write even better programs. Also, user interface is so important. And many of these programs in the old days suffered and could have been much better if they just had slightly better user interfaces.
One of the things I forgot to say when I was introducing Clark, but was thinking of doing while lying in bed this morning, thinking of how to introduce Clark, is Clark's background in the computers was way before mine, and he introduced me to this thing that called a word processor I had no idea about. But when I was first working on writing the book Out of Sight, handwriting a lot of stuff, and he got it into a word processor, and neither he nor I realized that was going to be a 7-year project, that he did all the technical stuff for me. But
especially the diagrams, you were very picky about the diagrams.
I remember,
if you have Out of Sight and look at the diagrams, you'll notice that the spacing on ocean waves and lines facing and lines back to back, etc., is all carefully hand tuned to look good visually. It's not on a 2x4 grid, for example. So everything I'd done for all of my diagrams for my square dance handouts and calls that I was doing in the 70s were on nice grids. And I had that technology for doing the diagrams, but Don was pickier. So it took a lot of effort to get that right. Don was also introduced to the Xerox Alto because the MIT lab had some of those, and what you see is what you get, and kind of what would later turn into the Apple Lisa and then the Apple Macintosh. Sorry. Yeah, but anyhow, the Apple Macintosh.
Yeah, the time frame that you're talking about, there was a magical machine that was available. There were about 6 of them in the entire world. There was Stanford had one, MIT had one. There are a few other places in the world that had one, and then of course they had them at the labs in Xerox, and it was this amazing thing called a laser printer. And that was what those drafts of Don's book were printed on.
Clark, I will have to send you the introduction, the forward and the afterward for the second printing, because I've credited a lot more people.
Oh, okay.
And described in there how the diagrams were done with you sitting at a computer with a light pen and me standing over your shoulder saying, no, drag this over here a little or tweak that over there.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure how many people remember what a light pen was, and I think I sort of understood it once, but.
I'll also say that, the people who were at Color Lab before me that got me in there are Sobalski and Don. And it was, as I said earlier, a little hard to kind of fit in there, given that I didn't call mainstream and plus and wasn't a traveling caller, et cetera, and didn't put out records and singing calls. But I did finally, meet people like Bill Davis. And at some point I got up my nerve and said, hey, I'd like to run a session on how people use computers in square dancing. So they put me on for in 83 or 84. But back then, computers in square dancing that I was talking about, I'd been doing lots of stuff since the 70s, but what the average person or caller could do was, we were talking mailing lists and news groups and maybe websites, but maybe not even much in websites back then.
No websites at that time.
Print flyers or something.
Yeah, but the biggest problem you had, Clark, is if you were going to use a computer to call square dancing at a big dance, you'd have to put the computer in. You'd have to kick 17,000 dancers out just to fit the computer.
Yeah, right. It's certainly no laptops or anything portable or luggable. So none of it was even back then, let's use the computer at a dance. And Color Lab did okay throughout the years, but I think we could have done better. letting our members know technology, where it's at. Obviously, a whole revolution's happened with going from records to mini discs to CDs to computers to MP3s, et cetera. And just that whole revolution as it happened, we had the people in Color Lab who were at the leading edge of all that, but the members and the management, they didn't really want to hear about it. I remember when I first went up to give my talk, I think it was Deco Deck, if any of you remember that name, maybe from the Maryland or DC area.
Yep.
He kind of leaned over to me and he said, "Son, I don't want you trying to sell us anything here." And he basically thought I was going to be a used computer salesman and say, "Hey, here I am, you should buy some of this." And that wasn't it at all. But he had such a misunderstanding of who I was or what I might be talking about. And all the people in Color Lab did. John Kaltenthaler.
Not all of us.
Yeah, right. Scott was there. Right. People like John Kaltenthaler had worked at IBM and knew documents. So that's why we got better professional documents in our earlier works, our earlier directions and so forth than we might have. But even he was not super open to any of this stuff.
I have a couple of quick Clark stories, I guess I want to tell. But my first time Clark and I met was Tuesday evening, and I dropped in at Tech Squares. Dennis Marsh was still the caller at that time, or the caller again. And I was sitting on the sidelines watching, and this young, non-bearded, bright-eyed kid sits next to me, and he said, "Hi, I'm Clark Baker, and people said I should talk to you. I've been doing something with a computer, and I understand you have some rules behind what's happening with choreography, and tell me about it." And as you said before, the mental image didn't fit the program basics or the algorithms that he was thinking of for creating his square dance choreography. The next story is, at one point or another, when Clark was well into creating his master's thesis on creating choreography that he talked about earlier, I felt that, and I was an active member of the Tri-State Colors Association, most of whom had no idea what was going on with Clark. And we generally had a guest in some kind of a program every week. And I said, I'd like to bring Clark in on this to show what's going on in the background, just because it might be of general interest. And Clark came up as a dancer, not a caller. And we got to, as he said earlier, got to square up to dance through some of his things. And also, as he mentioned, he was aware of hand availability and body flow. And I recall him saying, when doing his body flow stuff, to get perfect body flow for everybody limited the amount of choreography greatly. So he, as he mentioned earlier, sacrificed a mirror image pair to acceptable but not great choreography, just so he could get some stuff through. But anyway, the story was, he got a square of callers and wives. I don't think we had any female callers in the group, up to dance through some of his mainstream material. And yes, his program didn't know hard from easy, but these dancers didn't, well, let's put it this way, it was really embarrassing how poorly they danced or couldn't get through this material. And we eventually made it happen, but that was, I think, Clark's introduction to a pile of callers. See you, Mel.
Are we telling Clark stories now?
Apparently. Do you have one?
I do. The first time I met Clark was a Color Lab. And when he got up some collars, got a square of collars up, and decided he was going to add some dancers to it, and it became I don't know, there were like 8 couples in the square, and we were dancing out there. So I brought my wife out there at the time, and we were dancing hex. And so all of that stuff I learned from Clark because I was at Collar Lab when he was showing it. So that's my Clark story. Every time he gets people up to do something, like he was doing what was it? It was called oh, what's it called? It's
Hashtag squares.
hashtag squares. I got up with them, watched them do hashtag squares. Actually didn't get to dance. I actually had to watch it at first. And that's how I was introduced to it. So it was cool.
Yep. No, I like getting people up after midnight and doing square games with them or whatever. And if you want to pick that knowledge up as a caller, there's nothing like being in it and watching it being taught. Just like the way to learn how to do one night stand dances is to attend a bunch of one night stand dances from an experienced caller and see what tips you can pick up from that. Same thing with if you want to teach hexagons, watch someone teach hexagons to people who don't know it, see how they did it, see how they gradually added the calls and how they talk and teach.
My earliest recollection of Clark is wandering by a room that I heard square dancing coming out of, and I poked my head in there, and they said, "Oh, great!" At this time, I was about in like week 3 of the square dance, beginner square dance class, and they said, "Oh, come on in here, and you're going to fill out this back square because we're down a person." And I'm like, "But I don't know any of this stuff." And they put me in there anyway. They're like, "Hey, it'll be okay. Just be a human checker." And the main takeaway from that was when he called 3/4 exchange the boxes. Follow Chris. Better yet, don't. But but my favorite Clark story is one for which I was not present, but that some friends of mine told me about. And maybe Clark will tell the story, and it concerns the call "Damn It."
Oh yeah. So I used to, as a newer caller, if I got something wrong, I would swear and say, "Damn it." And that was not a good thing, a habit to get into, because you don't want to be doing that over the mic. And at some point, my dancers, and probably my wife was part of it, got together and they decided that when I said "damn it," they would all change places, I think with their opposite, maybe with their partner. It was one of the two. And the first time I'm just calling along and mess something up, or I'm trying to resolve and screw it up, and said "damn it." And suddenly there's all this motion and I'm just looking like, and I'm like, "Damn it." And boom, it happened. I'm like trying to figure out what it is and what's going on. It was pretty funny. And I think they broke me of that habit of saying "damn it."
The version I heard ends with, yes, you're "damn it." "Oh, damn it. Damn it. Damn it. Oh, I see. Okay. Damn it." Square through 2, right and left grand.
Was there a double damn it?
I think because of what they had to do, since it had to work from anywhere, doing it twice put them back where they had started, is my bet.
Next time you go to Caller Lab, anybody, be sure to go to the late evening Monday sessions that Clark does. Poor Clark now is expected to come up with a new puzzle solving concept every year. I think for the first number of years, correct me if I'm wrong, Clark, it was grand square variations.
I always liked grand square variations. Yep.
And as Scott said, he ran into hexes there, etc. Oh, I was going to say something earlier when I guess Bill Ackerman took credit for the concept of saying
clueless clicking.
Clueless clicking. Aren't you, Clark, the one that coined the term for square dance choreography overflow that everybody just...
Yeah, I think I did. Right. I didn't mention it, but you're right. One of the things that that I hadn't thought of it the whole time preparing this talk, that I had my program do is it knew how long you would be, if you're doing an arm turn, it knew how much arm turning the call ended with, like from right hand wave, swing through ends with the center's arm turning half by the left. And then for every call at the beginning, it knew how much arm turning motion the call started with. So for example, from ocean waves, the center looking out starts with a effective arm turn half, correct? They're walking in a tight arc. And it would add the end of the previous call. Oh, and it had another bit that said whether the dance action throughout the call remained the same. So a simple call like cast off 3/4 added a cast off 3/4 to whatever motion you have. It wasn't like the motion started and stopped in the middle and started at the end. So then it could add it up across calls, and it had to pick, and that was called overflow. And it had to make sure that you never did more than, I think it was 1 1/4 was its limit. Otherwise, the dancers get dizzy.
This has evolved, not surprisingly, into a nerd reminiscing conversation, which I'm enjoying. But I'm really pleased to see that some of our newer callers are hanging in there and just soaking up the nostalgia of this. And I actually, on a different topic, I see Gerhard is with us. I know you were here earlier and you've disappeared. I was just about to talk to you when you disappeared, but Gerhard is the one that has given a talk on our group about his program called
the
Callers Toolbox.
Yep.
And it's not, Gerhard, you can correct me on this, but it's more of a database of and collection of an awful lot of good stuff. I don't think you've got a version of it that can create choreography like we've been talking about here, but have you got any, I was going to say 2 cents worth to throw in, but 2 pfennigs worth to throw in.
Well, actually, I was too late to hear Clark's presentation, so that's because of the time differences. I thought it's an hour later, so I started. Oops, yeah. So that's the reason I didn't join early enough. Well, on your question, there are lots of aspects, but I don't know where to start on. So
again, we were hitting 2 categories of computer related things that Clark was going through the history of one of them, and that's choreography written, applications written to help people write choreography or see what's going on with choreography. And the other version, which we didn't touch, are the elaborate MP3 players that callers now use for calling. And yours, I believe, is yet a 3rd category of a great database of different calls and such. I'm just curious if it has anything aspect of it that lends itself to writing choreography rather than just finding good things.
No. That was intentionally not what I wanted. I saw for myself that I had a lot of materials, or you have a lot of material on the internet. You know there's all this of Vixida, or you need Behind the Mic. It comes out every month, and they have a lot of sequences that are interesting. Some of them, some are not it, but it's interesting. And each time you say, there is something I would like to have it, you can't find it, or at least I couldn't. And then my intention was, okay, why not have a collection? And I started out with a collection that I'm distributing freely with it, about 6,000 sequences. But that is not the big thing. I thought, how can you make use of it then? So I tried to do something that is able to, where you are able to filter it by any criteria that you want, make it flexible so you can find your material, and then, okay, put it together somehow. You can put it together in tips, or you can put it together on a piece of paper. you can put it together in the latest version so that you can use it in a square view, things like that. So make use of the material. It's, I mean, the database itself is fine, but it's dead if you are not able to use the material afterwards. And that's what I try to do and still trying to do to improve. So that was the intention. So you're right, it's a third kind of thing to do. I'm not, well, I believe the sequence or colorama or the SD are good enough for checking as a replacement for checkers and so on. So why reinvent the wheel? And that's also what I thought. There are some things that a caller might need, as I say. Maybe you need a program for having shortcuts, typing shortcuts or something like that, or you need something to scan in. So I added those utilities, but I have not written them. But I just found some shareware perls that I added to it so that it's all together a toolbox. And that's the name of it. So you can just use it as a tool. And if you don't need it, well, forget about it. But the core is to have that. And the second thing I did in these sequences is that I tried to avoid duplicates. And that to the thing that I had to invent a certain language, which I have defined so that you can, first of all, you have all the designators, heads, sides, boys, girls, whatever. And then you have the calls itself. And you all know how difficult it is just promenade to define promenade halfway or promenade 3/4 and all this kind of stuff. You need to say what is a call. And well, I found a way to do that so that when you enter those things, they are pretty much in the same format. And then you can compare those and say, oh, this is duplicate. So if I enter, for instance, some things from behind the mic, then quite often I find, that's already in. I don't have to enter it again. So you don't have a lot of waste for it and have a lot of rubbish in there or duplicates. And,
Gerhard, I remember when you spoke with us that you did a lot of good stuff of, if I like to use men and women versus girls and boys, and you converted very nicely on that. You had a lot of different this, or this all equals this. Brad, you have some of that in Taminations, but some places I get confused. One of the things about Taminations that always stumps me, if I say heads do a right and left through, square through, it doesn't know what I'm talking about. Dancers would, but I have to say heads do a right and left through, centers square through. So I've learned to type C space before almost everything.
Can I make a point on that?
Definitely.
I consider myself kind of an old fart caller because I've been around a while. Not as long as Daryl, but whatever. In the old days, I felt that there was a sense of, as a caller, you activate someone heads square through 4, or heads right and left through, star through, whatever. And generally the dancers know and remember who was active, and they're still active for the next call and the next call and the next call, unless it's a call like double pass through, which is an 8-dancer call, and then everyone's active. And my computer calling program would know that by using the word and between the calls. It'd be heads, star through, and right and left through, and square through 3 or something. And it would use the word and. So it knew it as it was generating the material, who was active. And if the old actives were the same as the new actives, it conjoined them with the word and. The newer programs know that centers, it's almost like centers is a concept, and you have to do head star through, that's a special case, or heads go into the middle. And then it's centers star through, centers right and left through, et cetera, et cetera. And unfortunately, because you've had to type that so much to the computer programs, there are now callers who believe that that's the proper way of calling, and they've lost the concept of the last actives are the current actives, and they don't like that style of calling anymore. So that's a case. We didn't talk about unintended consequences of these programs. Certainly clueless clicking is one. But I think a more precise form of what the definitions are and what proper calling is has, for better or worse, come out of these programs. They've standardized stuff maybe a little bit too much. Bill being kind of emphatic about the boys fold double pass through being wrong. I don't think that's wrong. I think that's legitimate mainstream calling. And just because
I think you can call that. It's what happens after that. And actually the adjustment that they're going to make after that call, because you're probably going to call track 2 or leads trade or something, that I'm actually okay with that. It's some of the other ones that I don't like.
Right. And I think our square breathing chapter in the definitions, yet unpublished, but Dottie Welch, Michael Maltonfort, and I have been over it and have finally come to a point where all three of us agree on what it says. Has a bunch of examples of that, but the computer programs won't be able to do them well. And anyhow, I think that stuff is legit, especially at Mainstream and Plus, but the computer programs are forcing us away from that stuff being legit. Same thing just with there's people who don't want to move unless you say centers do it, even though most of us as callers know you don't have to say centers. But since the programs do, now the dancers are getting to the point where they're like, who does it? I go, the last people who were active. They go, that rule isn't written down anywhere. That doesn't mean anything to me.
Well, I talked about that a little bit in my talk I gave a couple weeks ago about unwritten rules of square dancing. And and my position on that is that you have to be very careful about it. And so I think that things like pass to the center and pass through, said just like that, are kosher for certain reasons. But the place where you get into trouble is a lot of callers will say something like, heads touch a quarter, boys run. And they expect that only the head boys are going to run, whereas what you really commanded was for all the boys to run. And so there's there's places where it works and there's places where it doesn't, and it's a subtle thing that is a little tricky for newer callers and maybe for older ones.
I usually say heads touch a quarter and those boys run.
Right. Yep. Yeah. See, that's the same as saying centers run, and saying those boys is exactly the way that I would do that particular thing. But I know there are some callers who say, and again I disagree with them, that of course they mean the boys because the centers, because the centers are the ones that are active, and so this notion of active dancers is a little bit of a subtle thing.
What I dislike more than anything else is the fact that if you have you have a column of dancers, of 8 dancers, that I can set up, I can either do a triple box, I can do a split box, or I can do the center box. If I say centers circulate, as opposed to in your triple box circulate, as opposed to split circulate, I've got 3 different boxes there, and I have problems with people that don't specify those.
I can just add something here for terminations. If you type calls on one line, then if you prefix it with heads, it'll apply heads to the whole line. You could type heads right, left, through, square, through 4, and that'll work. You can type heads, touch a quarter, boys run, and only the center boys run. If you put them on separate lines, then the heads concept doesn't apply to the second call, of course.
Well, so that brings up the issue of what the programs say in their output, what they put in the file or in front of you on the screen, versus what words you will utter to the dancers, and they may not be the same. If you take the case of SD, there's a lot of really complicated, especially if you do complicated challenge junk. But even on simpler things at regular levels, there's what the computer says, what you had to type in to get the program to do it, or what the program put in its output versus what you're really going to say when you're in front of the dancers. And those quite often are two different things. And there's also, you know, this also gets into delivery, the emphasis that you put on the words, the microsecond timing of the space between the words as you're talking to the dancers. And those are all things that beginner callers have to learn, I think, pretty much from experience. But there's a whole bunch of stuff there. But watch out when these programs have output that you may or may not want to literally read what the program said.
Brad, it's good to know that you can do heads, right and left through, square through, if you do it on the same line. I know I've known and used some of the things that you do that because I've listened to some of your talks, but correct me if I'm wrong. You're saying I can string as many calls together as I want as long as they work. And I've also noticed, because I've only done it with pass through trade by kind of thing, or swing through centers run. And also my tendency is to put commas between the calls, but sometimes they forget and it still does it. I'm gathering you don't need commas, but you ignore them if they are there.
Yeah, it ignores pretty much any punctuation. And as far as string calls together, yes, it's pretty good at that. I really wouldn't recommend string calls together that aren't related.
Okay. I actually, when in teaching mental image class, will, if I'm going to do heads square through and then touch a quarter, I will stop. I won't put the two on one line because I want the people that are learning this to be able to visualize mentally where the square through ends, and then we dance them there, and then we go down to the next call. So I have to remember, well, that in that case it's not a centers only, but in that kind of a case, I have. And when we're talking about square breathing and something related, Brad, I figure I should ask you this. I always get a kick out of, if you have two couples facing and say square through any number of hands, it seems like they lean forward and kiss each other before they do it. I've just been curious about that. You're muted. You're muted, Brad.
Yep, there we go. Now I'm good. Now I'm good. Yes, for some of the calls where you start with the heads, if it's not pre-programmed in the database, then it like prepends head start and then does the call on the head start, makes the move in look like they're kissing.
I enjoy watching that. It gives me a kick every time. But it's nice to know the reason for it. Good, thank you. And I'm glad you don't have to write, say, head start, because that's always screws me up on SD.
That's a C4 thing. You can say oddly kissing square through 4.
Yeah, that is odd. Is it seriously, Chris, or are you just ad-lib nicely?
No, I'm just being the class clown.
Thank you, appreciate it. Usually I can get that, but I was outclassed on this one.
Here's something that I think is interesting. I've never had to deal with the trying to do the animations properly. But if you watch, and I think I'm talking Taminations here, it definitely looks like the dancers are at Disney World moving on tracks underground, where they kind of go and turn and go and turn, and, you know, they speed up and slow down as appropriate and so forth. Not to say that's wrong or bad, but just, you know, the computer is going from point A to point B in a straight line and around a curve, and they're all blended together. And if we were to take a real square of dancers and call a sequence, filming them from above, and digitize their XY positions, and then have that be how programs did the calls, I think it would look different than virtually any of the programs that are animating dancers. Do people, I mean, you know what I'm saying there, right? especially Brad.
Yeah.
I'll let Brad talk.
Right. Of course, the animations are nothing more than sequences of curves and lines. The way you get that, if you drill down to the lowest level, that's what it is. That's pretty much just what any animation is. It's just, how detailed do you want to go, and how far down do you want to break it down?
And somehow that's different than if we just watch a real square dance. So maybe that gives us to tie into a company that Dan mentioned earlier. That shows you the huge step we have between what we do and what Pixar does to bring life to animate inanimate objects and make them move in realistic ways.
I'm thinking that if we can accurately capture that notion where the husband starts to wander off to the snack table and the wife grabs him and puts him back on course, this is
yeah.
Clark, I don't know if you know, but one of I think it's a recent feature that Brad put in, is you can click on a dancer in the sequencer and see the path he's taken or the path he will be taken on the floor.
Yes, I like the doodles. Those doodles, I think, are, there's someone at Contra Dancing who has a shirt of doodles of certain Contra Dance calls. And it makes a t-shirt and they sell them and they're pretty. So knowing the doodle that you walk, I think, is an interesting thing.
Another, working backwards with that kind of a thing, when Ferris wheel sort of fell into my mind, I pictured a smooth movement of the in-facing couples moving in and shuffling into the other dancers. But when I tried to put it into words, I couldn't really say that. And the best I think I said was couples half circulate and smoothly move into a wheel and deal. And dancers tend to do it the right way. They sort of start wheeling and dealing or shifting their facing direction in the process of going. But I can see where that's a real problem if you're going to animate it.
Right. If you look at Ferris wheel on Taminations, you'll see two different animations. The first one is according to the Color Lab definition, which is that the couples half circulate, wheel and deal. And the second one is where the way dancers actually dance it, which is they just go and do blend them both together into one motion, and there is no temporary two-face line in the middle.
What, so you say there are two versions. I mean, the second version is what I envisioned and then had to put it into words so that people would understand. But you say there you have both versions on Taminations. If I type it into the sequencer, which one does it do? Not that I really paid attention. I should have done that, but.
Yeah, I'm not sure really. It's since the official one is first in the definitions, it probably would pick that one.
So in your definition part, you have, it can be either this way or this way. How do you present that? I hadn't gone back and looked.
Well, yeah, I'm looking at it right now. It's Ferris wheel. The one is right-hand two-face line strictly, and it says, and then if you look on the details, well, I have a little hint here. It says the center couples form a momentary two-face line following the dance action description. And the dance action is in the Color Lab.
You just muted.
And then in the second one, it says the centers start the wheel and deal action immediately, and the two-face line is not formed. This is how many dancers perform the call.
Good. I'll have to look at that. Sounds good. But I can, again, that's the problems that Clark and you were talking about, is how do you actually show what's really being done versus how it was put into words and how people accept that kind of stuff.
Not to be too much of a suck up, but when I was learning to dance at the club that we did it, it was basically alternating tips of club level and class. And so I remember in about week 3 or so, watching the dancers do Ferris wheel. And it was the most beautiful, most complicated call I had ever seen. And I was like, wow, I can't wait until I can do Ferris wheel. Look at that one.
What a suck up you are, and I love it. An interesting thought, at one point I was talking to, because I was doing a lot of contra dancing too, talking to a contra dancing friend of mine, and we got into talking about Western dancing and about Ferris wheel, among other things. And I took her to a Western dance to see what Western dancing was like. And I tried to pick one that had 2 halls, 2 callers, both reasonably good, you know, layman callers. And we went into one hall and she heard Ferris wheel, but she said, I didn't really see what it was. And then we went into another one where the caller, and this is one example I used for the difference between stop and go calling versus smooth dancing. The caller in the other one did a little bit of stop and go calling. And she said, oh, I see what a Ferris wheel is now. And that's because he would stop between each call so she could see the formation form and where one call started and the next one did. But to me, it was kind of interesting. The other, where you couldn't tell one call from another in the previous hall, the guy had good timing. It was good flow. The words were just used there to help people create this one dancing movement. It was an interesting experience.
So Don, when you were talking about Western dancing, were you talking about Western square dancing, or were you talking about country Western dancing?
Oh, club dancing, modern Western square dancing. Square dancing as you and I know it and love it, versus the contra New England square parallel movement that exists, and some people are smart enough to enjoy both of them. I got Clark to do that eventually, but that's a whole
Not the first time. It was horrible the first time.
I say that's another story. Yeah, I still love your answer. Why this time and not before? And you said, I just wasn't ready.
Yeah.
You weren't bored enough with
That
C4.
wasn't what I was looking for in my dance experience. Yes.
Yeah. You weren't bored with C4 yet.
Yeah.
Well, that's why I
put a
started
link
doing
in.
his spicy contra, you know, the
Zesty.
the zesty contra. Yeah, I started doing that because there was no other dancing going on, and it sounded better than, you know, something else that was going on.
Contras is a whole other topic, but I've always said using contras at a modern Western square dance is death, because those dancers don't know how to dance zesty contras. And Clark's been good at training some of the Western callers what it's all about.
I put a link in to a Google Doc spreadsheet that at least one of you looked at when they saw the link. So that's one of my goals of this talk, was to be able to have that spreadsheet and kind of fill it out. I don't know if there's inaccuracies on it. I didn't make it writable to everybody, but at least you can see what I believed. If I got anything wrong, you can let me know.
It's been interesting chatting, guys. At least I've had a good time with it, and I see those that have stayed probably have enjoyed it too.
Yeah, thank you very much. This has been a fun one to sit and listen to, especially a lot of the olds, the history and the old anecdotes.
I was pretty sure, Dan, that it was something you could tune into because
yes,
of both your technical and square danceical backgrounds. And Brad, I'm glad you joined in because we picked on your thing quite a bit. Carol, you're talking but muted.
You're muted.
Or you're just saying goodbye. Thank you.
I was just saying goodbye. I didn't want to disturb you all.
No problem. Yeah,
Good.
it's good to see you.
I'm already disturbed.
Now, Scott, is that because of our conversations here, or is that in general?
It's in general.
You don't have to answer that. Yolanda, are you waving goodbye too, or are you just smiling? You're muted. You're muted.
Yes, I know. It took a minute. I was just waving goodbye to somebody else. I'm enjoying the conversation, and I'm drawing choreography at the same time. Multitasking. It's sort of fun because I just finished reading a book called Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell.
Yep.
Clark's a big.
Yeah, so one of the sections is about the computer programs from the 1970s and 70s. And so I started with computers in 1982. And my younger brother simultaneously was learning how to write choreography for games. So it was sort of neat to have it combined, you know, like I was never doing it at this level. You know, I was just typing and stuff for office procedures, but this was sort of neat to have the history of square dancing integrated in what I just read.
Cool.
Yeah.
Bill's not here. I'll point out. He's, I don't know, he's probably a good 5 years older than me. And so was at MIT earlier, and is more of an old time programmer than I am. Definitely more of a hacker, using it in the positive MIT jargon, not the bad reputation it's gotten in the world, but more of a hacker and a bit twiddler, and also probably a perfectionist than virtually any of us in his programming. He's programmed on more and older computers than the rest of us. So, you know, we're fortunate to have someone of his knowledge and capabilities, you know, implementing and doing and maintaining for such a long time the program like SD, and making it available for free.
I think Bill wrote the first spell program, the first spelling checker.
Oh, did he? Oh, wow.
I think that's what he's saying.
His was really early on. I think it might have been the first one.
Yeah, and also MIT was fortunate to have such an active square dance club, such that we got people like, you know, John Detreville, Mike Tursoff, John Sobalski, Bill, me, Chris, etc. So there's and Stephen Gilday. There's a cadre of computerish people, all of whom also had the square dance interest in there. And I think Don had a little bit to do with starting MIT's square dance club. So that brings Don into that too.
I had the square dance end of it, definitely not the computer nerdy end. I was just nerdy in my own way. But yes, it was. I moved into the Boston area, got a call from Bill Mann. And he said, a number of us have been doing traditional square dancing, but we hear there's this Western style, and I want to start a group at MIT, or I've got a room because of the outing club. Can we start? Would you be interested in joining? And I said, yes, under one condition. And he said, what? And I said, that I be the caller. And he said, oh, you do some calling. And I had been, before I moved, in the Springfield, Hartford area doing for several years. And so he came over, and he and my first wife, Judy McCoy Beck Kotak, talked about it for a while, decided what we're going to do, advertised somewhat. And I think by the third week of meeting, we actually had a full square. And then after a year and a half of doing this, I got busy with graduate work plus full-time job, plus my dad passing away and having to clear up the estate and such. And so I dropped out. And I think it was about a year and a half. And that's when some of the people there, Veronica McClure in particular, around Dance Skewer, decided, well, we should keep this going. And they made it officially Tech Squares, got it as a club by itself rather than the auspices of the outing club. And then I rejoined it again in many years later after two other callers.
Hey, you know, on the list of MIT computer nerd square dance people, there were a lot of them in that lab. You know, Sussman and a bunch of people in the AI lab were in the club at various
Carl
times.
Hewitt learned to dance. He was our thesis advisor for both John and me, and Sussman learned to dance, right?
Right. I was thinking of them, and there were some other ones. Some of the names escape me, but the guy that did the automatic programming thing that Kent Pittman was on. Anyway, the but the most maybe actually I don't know if he's the most recent MIT nerd to get into square dancing and calling, but let us not forget Guy Steele.
Guy Steele, yeah.
Super big deal computer nerd guy, and now working on the Caller Lab, and he's been learning to call for a few years. And
He's chairman of the definitions committee now.
Yeah, there you go.
Another MIT computer nerd I could never get into square dancing was Alan Kotak, but he had a
Yeah,
lot.
I was going to mention that one, but I thought it might not be.
However, his wife, who was my first wife, was definitely involved in both Western and Contra. And he was, I guess, instrumental in letting me use his terminal to get into DEC computers, to get into working on out of sight in the lab, so I didn't have to drive all the way into Cambridge on occasion. But if you don't know who he is and what his computer background is, it's Kotok, and check it out in Wikipedia.
Yeah, he's another older timer than most of us at the lab.
Yeah. Fun stuff, guys. Quiet time. Is
Then
that
it's time to
good?
go eat lunch.
Yeah, I hate to break up the party, and I'm more than happy to leave this open, but I'm about ready to go on and get on with the various other projects that I have to do this weekend, include knocking a wall open and things like that.
Yeah, I'm about to leave. Thanks again, Clark, for keeping us entertained. Dan, this is I think you've hung in there longer than usual before just leaving. So we hit one of your topics. Yolanda, I had no idea that you had the computer backgroundy stuff, which is kind of cool.
I remember the first time I learned how to do office procedures, because my mom has a legal secretary background, that I came in to class and the teacher would actually learn about computers on the weekend and teach us. And there was like 6 or 8 teachers in the classroom, and they couldn't figure out why the computers wouldn't start. And I thought, I let them try and figure it out for a while. And then I said, maybe if you push the power bar, you know, and one of the cleaning ladies had unplugged the power bar so they could vacuum. That's how new computers were in our school system. I think I was in the first class that had anything to do with computers at all. And so,
unfortunately, my college computer lessons as a mechanical engineer, they took us down to the computer building and taught us how punch cards worked.
I remember those days.
Yeah, and the way I learned about internet was in the 90s, and we had to figure out we had to pretend that we were tourists in New York and had to figure out where the streets were for certain things that we had to go and see and stuff. That's how we learned about internet.
Anyway, Dan, I think, is going to bow out, but leave the machine going. I am going to bow out and see what I should have for breakfast, even though it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon, typical breakfast time. Have some more coffee because I like it, not because it keeps me awake. And I had fun. Oh, I was gonna, he's gone again, mention to Gerhard that it's, unfortunately you missed the first hour, but
It'll be on video, right?
It'll be on video, yeah. And you can put some references in your website, Clark.
Yeah, if anybody wants to send me documents, I will push document or links in the appropriate places.
I'll try to remember to do that. Certainly, you can put a link to the Google Doc I mentioned.
Yeah, I think that would be cool. There's all sorts of collation of materials that, you know, I really need something other than a full-time job and a house to take care of and a hobby that.
That's what COVID's for. It gives you plenty of free time. All that commuting time you save.
Yeah.
You can always
Computer-
come over to my house. There's stuff to do here. We have a lot of painting left.
Computers are supposed to help us save time, right?
There's an old line about how the best computer programmers are lazy because they will spend 3 months implementing something so that they don't have to do a 45-minute process twice.
Yes. Yeah. So Dan, get in touch with me and if we want to chat more about something, feel free to email me or.
I'll drop you an email shortly, I think. Yes.
Weekends are good. Yep.
Cool.
Even tomorrow if you want to do it. I'm going to go
Cool.
away.
Okay.
It's been fun. Thanks for the topic. It was easy to prepare, but I learned a lot.
Thanks, Clark.
Bye, y'all.
Bye, Clark.
Bye, Michael.
I think the consensus is I will shut this down so I can upload the recording faster.
Good.
I'll catch y'all later. Bye.
I'll see you. Bye.